Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories. The night presses close against the open road, carrying a silence that feels almost alive. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth lingers in the shadows and fear rides quietly at your side. Tonight, we bring you 7 true, most haunting trucker horror stories encounters born from deserted highways, dim rest stops, and long stretches of darkness where something unseen kept pace with the wheels. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help us keep rolling deeper into the dark. And share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. Let's see who's awake with us on the night road. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road remembers everything. Story number 1. Ray had been driving long enough to know every trick dispatch tried to pull, but the pay on this run was too good to turn down. A straight shot overnight through the mountains, a tight delivery window at a distribution center by dawn, and a bonus if he arrived early. It meant cutting sleep, sure. It meant crossing a stretch of highway most drivers preferred to see in the daylight. But the tanker was full, the paperwork was in order, and Ray's bills were waiting at home. The night had settled thick over the interstate by the time he cleared the last familiar town. The glow of storefronts and parking lots fell away behind him, swallowed by the dark ridges of the hills. The road climbed and twisted, shouldered by rock faces and endless pine. His headlights tunneled forward, twin cones of pale light on the reflective lines. Inside the cab, everything hummed with quiet routine: the low growl of the engine, the gentle whistle through the door seal, the occasional rattle from something in the sleeper. His thermos of coffee sat in the cup holder, gone lukewarm. The digital clock on the dash crept past midnight. The route on his GPS was simple: stay on the interstate until exit 129, cut across State Route 47 through the pass, and rejoin the main highway on the other side. He'd never taken 47 at night before, but he'd heard it shaved close to 40 minutes off the trip. A narrow 2-lane, sure, but dry weather, no ice, clear skies. On paper, there was nothing to worry about. The first thing that felt off was how empty the road became. Miles passed with no oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead, nothing but the reflective eyes of guardrail posts rushing by. Even the CB stayed quiet. The usual chatter and static disappeared somewhere around the last rest area. Ray turned the volume knob back and forth, but all he got was a thin, steady hiss. He told himself it was nothing. Late hour, remote stretch, most drivers preferred the lower routes. He checked his mirrors out of habit. The tanker's silver curve glinted, perfectly in line, no sway. Darkness beyond. The overhead sign for exit 129 appeared out of the night sooner than he expected, reflective letters bright in his beams. State Route 47, east. Dunlow Pass divided by Crooked Ridge. He flipped his blinker, took the ramp, and eased onto the narrower blacktop. The asphalt changed texture, a softer hum under the tires, the lane lines closer, and a little more faded. Pines pressed closer on both sides, tall and silent. His high beams reached only so far before the trees swallowed the light. For the first few miles, nothing happened at all. The road climbed in long, steady grades, then dipped into shallow valleys. Yellow curve signs flashed by 35 miles per hour, then 25 around tighter bends. Ray settled in, hands loose on the wheel, eyes sweeping from asphalt to mirrors to gauges. The night wrapped around the truck like a thick blanket. Then, in the middle of a long, uphill stretch, the GPS screen blinked. The map froze for a heartbeat, then the route line vanished. A small gray banner popped up. Recalculating. Ray frowned, tapped the side of the unit with one knuckle. Waiting for it to redraw the path, he glanced ahead and saw a road sign he didn't remember from the last time he'd checked the route. Exit 47A, Mill Hollow, 1 mile. He blinked. An exit? On a state route? That didn't make sense. There were occasional pull-offs and service roads up here, but proper exits belonged to interstates. He leaned closer to the windshield, eyes narrowed at the dark stretch ahead. True enough. A green exit sign appeared about a minute later, rising from the right shoulder like it had always been there. Exit 47 amperes. Mill Hollow. A white arrow curved off into the trees. Ray glanced at the GPS again. The screen now showed a blank grid. No roads, no icons, just his little triangle sitting in gray space. Maybe the map data's old, he thought. New development, some little town trying to attract traffic off the mountain. It wouldn't be the first time. The timer in his mind, though, ticked steadily. He was running a little behind thanks to a construction slowdown earlier in the night. If Mill Hollow had fuel, coffee, or a faster route, it might save his bonus. As he came alongside the off-ramp, he made a decision so small it hardly felt like one at all. He turned the wheel. The truck eased onto the ramp, the main road falling away behind in his mirrors. The ramp curved gently right, descending between walls of trees. No other vehicles, no overhead lights. At the bottom of the ramp, the world opened up. A small town lay ahead in a shallow valley, its lights scattered like warm embers. A gas station canopy glowed on the left, an old-fashioned design with a brick storefront and a single row of pumps. A handful of houses rose beyond it, porch lights glowing, silhouettes of trees against a star-heavy sky. To the right, a narrow main street ran past what looked like a diner, a hardware store, a couple of small shops with hand-painted signs. It looked ordinary, almost cozy, sitting there in the bowl of the hills. Ray slowed as he reached the end of the ramp, looking for road markings. The sign at the intersection was simple: Mill Hollow, Poppaday 612. He couldn't remember ever hearing about it from other drivers. He flicked his blinker again and turned left toward the gas station. The canopy lights buzzed faintly, moths circling the fixtures. The station itself looked older, no bright brand logos, just a faded sign that read Mill Hollow Fuel and Mart in peeling red letters. He pulled the rig alongside the outermost pump, careful of the turning radius. As the engine idled, he glanced toward the storefront, expecting to see the usual overnight clerk behind the glass. The store appeared empty. The fluorescents were on inside, humming softly. Rows of shelves stood neatly in place, displays of chips and candy, a rotating rack of maps by the door. But no one stood at the counter. No movement at all. Ray checked the clock. 12:47 a.m. Maybe they keep the door locked this late, he thought. And you've got a knock. He set the brake, grabbed his wallet and logbook, and climbed down from the cab. The air outside was colder than he expected, with that high mountain bite that went straight through his jacket. The smell of pine was strong, layered over with the faint scent of old gasoline. The night was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with distant highway noise and rustling leaves, but a stillness so complete it felt almost deliberate. No insects chirped, no distant dogs barked. The town lights shone steadily, without a single flicker. His boots thudded softly on the concrete as he approached the store. The automatic doors didn't open. They looked like they had tracks for sliding. But there was no motion sensor on the ceiling, just a small brass handle. He grasped it and pulled. The door swung inward on silent hinges. A small bell above the frame chimed, a bright, old-fashioned sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The coolers hummed along the back wall. Glass doors fogged slightly near the edges. A pot sat on the hot plate beside the register, half full of coffee that had gone from fresh brewed to that dark, overcooked color. "Hello?" Ray called, stepping inside. His own voice came back to him in a soft echo, bouncing off tile and glass. No footsteps approached. No answering call from the back. He walked to the counter, glancing around. No security cameras that he could see. No open door to a stockroom. Just a plain wooden door with a keyhole and a small metal sign that read, "Employees Only." He rang the small bell on the counter once, lightly. The clear chime drifted through the store and faded. No one came. Ray shifted his weight, frowning. He could feel the minutes slipping away. Fuel wasn't strictly necessary yet. He had enough to clear the pass and hit a major truck stop on the other side, but his eyes burned a little at the edges. Coffee would have been good. He was about to turn and leave when he noticed something odd about the stack of receipts by the register. The top slip was dated. He could read the numbers clearly. 11:02 p.m., but the year, in tiny print below, read like something wrong at first, more than 30 years earlier than the current date on his log. Probably an old roll someone forgot to swap out, he thought. Still, a quiet unease slid along his spine. On impulse, he leaned over the counter slightly, peering at the wall behind it. There, pinned crookedly near a faded calendar, hung a framed black and white photograph of the same gas station. The canopy, the pumps, the brick storefront, they were all there, looking barely changed except for the age of the picture. In the foreground of the photo, 3 people stood smiling. A man in coveralls, a woman in a simple dress, and a teenage boy with a ball cap pushed back on his head. In the upper corner of the frame, a date had been written in careful ink. It matched the year on the receipt. The employee's only door behind the counter moved. Not much, just a slight inward flex, as if someone on the other side had leaned against it or adjusted their weight. The doorknob didn't turn. The door didn't open. But Ray was certain he'd seen it. He straightened, clearing his throat. "Hey, I just need to know if you're open," he called, pitching his voice toward the back. A moment passed. Then, from somewhere beyond that closed door, a sound drifted into the empty store. It was soft, like someone speaking in the next room with the door mostly shut. The words were indistinct, a low murmur. But there was something about the tone that made the hairs on Ray's arms rise. It wasn't anger. It wasn't greeting. It was urgency. Then, clearer, as if the speaker had stepped right up to the other side of the door, came a single word. "Go." Ray's stomach tightened. The voice was neither old nor young, masculine nor clearly feminine, just worn, like it had been speaking for a very long time without rest. He licked his lips, glancing once more around the empty aisles. A chilly draft brushed his neck, though the store was sealed tight. The coffee on the hot plate sent up a weak ribbon of steam. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If this is some kind of joke." The bell over the entrance door chimed by itself. The door had not moved. It remained firmly shut. But the little bell above it swung gently, as if touched by an invisible hand. Ray's gaze snapped to it. The motion slowed, then stilled. His sense of the ordinary, of things behaving the way they were supposed to, faltered. The voice behind the employee's only door spoke again, just loud enough to be heard. "Go. Now." There was something in that second word, a weight. A warning that cut straight through his hesitation. Ray backed away from the counter, keeping his eyes on the door. He reached the entrance, pushed it open into the cold night, and stepped out under the buzzing canopy lights. The bell chimed above his head with a normal, simple ring. He took a breath of mountain air and realized his hands had started to tremble. "This is ridiculous," he told himself. "It's a tired brain, an empty store, quiet town vibes." But as he climbed back into the cab, a small, irrational part of him was certain he had just been urged out of that building by something that did not wish to be seen. He started the engine, the familiar vibration grounding him. As he pulled away from the pump, he checked his mirrors out of habit. In the reflection of his passenger side mirror, the gas station storefront stood exactly as he'd left it. But for the briefest instant, no more than a heartbeat, he thought he saw 3 figures standing behind the glass. A man, a woman, and a teenage boy, all in black and white tones like the framed photo inside. Their faces were turned toward the departing truck. Ray blinked hard, looked again, and saw only empty aisles and fluorescent light. He shook his head, cheeks flushing with the private embarrassment of someone spooking themselves. The rig rolled forward, easing toward the small intersection at the end of the station drive. Ahead, the town lay quiet. The diner's neon sign glowed softly, its letters reading Mill Hollow Cafe in a pale, comforting blue. A single pickup sat in front, dark inside. Streetlights lined the main road at generous intervals, their pools of yellow light overlapping. He planned to turn right, loop past the diner, and find the on-ramp back to 47. The sooner he was out of this valley, the better. At the stop sign, he paused, scanning left and right. Not a single car moved anywhere in town. No television flickered in any window. No figure crossed the street. The place could have been a painting. He turned right. The diner slid past on his left, windows showing empty booths, and a counter with neatly aligned stools. The open sign was lit, but no one stood behind the register. He drove past a barber shop, a small grocery, a hardware store with a dusty window display of tools arranged just so. Each storefront was lit inside. Each was deserted. A block later, He expected to see a sign pointing back to Route 47, maybe an on-ramp curving up into the trees. Instead, the main street simply continued, past more houses with identical porch lights burning at identical brightness. A sense of unreality grew in his chest, heavy and subtle. He checked the clock. Only a few minutes had passed since he'd left the highway. The main road curved gently left around a low hill. As he followed it, the town fell away behind a stand of trees for a moment. When it opened up again, Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. Ahead of him, the same diner appeared on the corner again. The same neon sign, the same pickup parked out front. The same gas station canopy glowed just beyond it. Mill Hollow Fuel and Mart, painted in peeling red. He looked down briefly at the steering wheel, then back up. The scene did not change. He had not turned around. He had driven straight. The truck rolled to a stop without him consciously deciding to brake. His heartbeat climbed, each pulse loud in his ears. Maybe you missed a fork, he thought. Maybe the road loops and comes back through town from the other side. Mountain roads do that. He glanced at the GPS for confirmation, desperate for some mundane explanation. The screen, which had been a blank grid moments earlier, now displayed a single line in a darker gray, looping in a perfect circle. His little truck icon sat on that circle, an endless track with no beginning and no end. A soft crackle came from the dead CB radio, making him jump. The sound was brief, like a breath. Ray forced himself to inhale, slow and deep. Fatigue, he told himself. The brain sees patterns. Towns look alike. Streets repeat. He could turn around, find another way through. There had to be an on-ramp somewhere. He eased the truck forward again, this time keeping his eyes sharp for any side street, any road sign, any indication of an escape back to the main highway. He passed the diner, the pickup, the glowing open sign. Just as before, he reached the hardware store, the grocery, a little park with a swing set, the chains hanging motionless. At the next intersection, an unfamiliar detail appeared. An old woman standing on the sidewalk, directly under a streetlight. She wore a long coat buttoned up to her neck, and her gray hair was twisted into a low bun. Her hands rested on the handle of a small cart, the kind used to carry groceries home on foot. The cart was empty. She watched the approaching truck with a stillness that made Ray's skin prickle. For a moment, he felt a fierce, irrational relief. Someone, finally, who was actually moving, actually present. He slowed the rig and rolled down the passenger window a few inches. "Ma'am?" he called, leaning slightly toward the open space. His voice felt too loud in the strange, muffled night. "Is there a way back to Route 47 from here?" "I think I missed the on-ramp." The woman tilted her chin, studying him with pale eyes that seemed to catch and hold the reflection of his headlights. Her expression didn't change. "You're not supposed to stop," she said. Her voice was dry, threaded with age, but there was no confusion in it. Just a calm certainty that reached across the gap between them. Ray's fingers curled tighter around the wheel. "I only pulled in for fuel," he replied, trying to keep his tone even. "Now I just need to get back on the highway." She shook her head once, slowly. "You weren't supposed to stop," she repeated. "They don't like it when trucks stop here anymore." "Who?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. The old woman's gaze flicked past him, up toward the rearview mirror on his side, then to the sleeper window, then finally back to his face. Her eyes looked tired in a way that went past flesh and bone. "You should follow the others," she said. "Stay in line. Don't look back. Don't get out again." Ray swallowed. "What others?" he asked softly. As if in answer, a faint sound drifted down the street behind him. Low diesel rumble, the layered vibration of multiple engines. It grew slowly, like a tide approaching. He shifted in his seat, checking his side mirror. At first, he saw only the empty road behind the tanker, washed in the reddish glow of his taillights. Then, gradually, shapes emerged from the darkness beyond range of his lamps. A truck, then another, then another. But something was wrong. Their outlines looked older, boxier, rounded fenders, narrower cabs, headlights dimmer, almost yellowed. They rolled forward in a neat line, perfectly spaced, their grills catching glints of light. No logos, no company names, no modern markings, Just plain colors, weathered but somehow untouched. His CB crackled again, this time with a soft, layered murmur like many voices speaking at once just below understanding. Then clearly, as if all those whispers had resolved into a single message, a voice filled the small cab. "Stay in line." He flinched, looking at the Artine of Lard, silent microphone hanging from its clip. The CB unit offered no indication of transmission. No channel number lit up. Just the same dull backlight. The old woman stepped back from the curb, her cart rolling gently behind her. For a heartbeat, the light caught her face and he saw not fear, but pity. "Don't stop at the lights," she said. "Not this time." Then she turned, pushing her empty cart toward a side street that disappeared between two shadowed houses. In a few steps, she was gone. The line of approaching trucks glided closer. There were 6 of them now, their engines synchronized in an eerie, steady rhythm. As the first drew alongside, Ray caught a glimpse of its cab through his side window. No driver sat behind the wheel. The seat was occupied by darkness, not just shadow, but something that seemed to drink in the dim light from the street lamps. Where a face should have been, there was only an absence, a hollow impression. Ray's breath caught, a chill racing over his scalp. The truck continued past, turning slowly in front of him, then aligning itself perfectly with the center of the lane ahead. Its taillights glowed a deep, dull red. Another followed, then another, until a quiet convoy stretched out before his own vehicle, all facing the same direction, all idling with restrained patience. Behind him, in the mirror, more headlights appeared. A full circle, encasing him front and back in a ring of silent, waiting rigs. The CB let out one final crackle. "Stay. In. Line." This time, the words seemed to reverberate not just in the cab, but in his chest, as if spoken inside his bones. Ray's rational mind reeled, scrambling for explanations, sleep deprivation, carbon monoxide, a vivid dream delayed by too much caffeine. But his hands, almost of their own accord, slid the shifter into gear. His foot eased off the brake. The convoy ahead began to roll. He followed. The trucks moved with uncanny smoothness, maintaining precise distance. The town slid by once more, the diner, the pickup, the park, yet this time Ray barely looked. His focus locked on the twin red lights ahead, the steady glow that became his anchor. They passed through intersections without stopping, gliding through dead greens and persistent yellows. When a light turned red, it seemed to do so for everything else, for cross streets that had no cars, for sidewalks that had no pedestrians but not for them. They did not slow. Ray realized, dimly, that they were no longer on the same loop of Main Street. The buildings changed, grew sparser. Houses gave way to dark stretches of field and forest. The pavement rose gently, inclining back toward the hills. The sense of enclosure loosened with each passing second. The lights of Mill Hollow fell behind, fading into a soft glow, then a pinprick, then nothing at all. Still, the convoy rolled on. Minutes stretched, indistinct. At some point, Ray blinked and saw, through the narrow gap between the trailer ahead and the one before it, the faint glimmer of reflective green. A highway sign. As they drew nearer, his headlights caught the letters clearly. State Route 47, West, Interstate, 3 miles. The lead trucks began to peel away, one by one, taking a wide, smooth curve up a gently sloping on-ramp that had not been there when Ray left the interstate. Their taillights glowed faint, then vanished over the crest. When his turn came, Ray steered his rig along the fresh blacktop, gratefulness and residual fear knotting together in his chest. The road joined the familiar wider lanes of Route 47 with a soft merge. The mountain pass stretched ahead, ordinary again. He glanced in his mirrors. No trucks followed. The highway behind him lay empty, a clean ribbon of asphalt under a sky just beginning to gray at the edges with the first hint of dawn. The CB sat silent. The GPS, as if nothing had ever been wrong, displayed his original route once more, a cheerful purple line guiding him toward the distant distribution center. Ray drove the remaining miles without stopping, without turning on the radio, without taking his eyes off the road for more than a second at a time. The world, gradually, returned to normal occasional oncoming headlights, a passing car, the glow of a familiar truck stop sign in the distance. He made his delivery with minutes to spare. The receiving clerk signed his paperwork, commented on his good time, and offered him a cup of coffee from the break room pot. Ray accepted. his hands steadier now, the surreal edges of the night softening. Later, in the quiet of the driver's lounge, curiosity overcame him. He pulled out his phone and searched for Mill Hollow. It took a moment for the results to populate. When they did, a single article stood out, an old news story from decades earlier. Mill Hollow community evacuated after landslide threat, the headline read. Photos showed the same gas station, the same diner, the same main street, but choked with emergency vehicles and yellow tape. The date matched the one he'd seen on the framed photograph and the faded receipt roll. According to the article, the town had been permanently closed through traffic after the surrounding hills became unstable. The road into the valley had been blocked, then later torn up, rerouted farther along the ridge. A small note at the bottom mentioned an accident, an overturned fuel convoy caught in the evacuation rush, several trucks lost. Route 47, the article concluded, had been entirely re-engineered in the years that followed. The old loop road had been removed from updated maps. Ray stared at the screen until the letters blurred. On his current GPS, there was no record of an exit labeled 47 amperes, no sign of a town in the valley. Satellite view showed only a scarred hillside, half grown over with scrub and young trees. He set the phone down, his pulse steady but deep, like the memory of a long climb in thin air. He didn't tell dispatch what had happened. When other drivers asked about the pass, he simply said he preferred the longer route, down where the road was wider and the towns were still on the map. And sometimes, on the quietest nights when the CB went oddly still and the highway stretched empty ahead, he would catch, just at the edge of hearing, a faint, distant murmur of engines moving in perfect unison. When that happened, he made very sure not to stop until the dawn was fully up and the world, once again, felt certain under his wheels. Story number 2. On certain stretches of highway, the night doesn't just feel quiet, it feels like it's listening. Daniel had been driving long enough to know the difference between a good night and a bad one. A good one meant a steady flow of traffic, open skies, and just enough radio chatter to keep him alert. A bad one felt like this. A thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through empty farmland. No other vehicles in sight. And the kind of stillness that made every creak in the cab sound important. It was just after 1 a.m. The clock on the dash glowed a soft green. Outside, the Midwest rolled away on either side in dark fields and distant tree lines, broken now and then by the faint shapes of barns or a lone yard light burning over a gravel driveway. The dispatch board had squeezed him in on this load produce. Reefer trailer humming behind him, a tight delivery time on the other side of the state. It wasn't his usual route. He'd picked up mile marker numbers like new vocabulary all evening, trying to fix the path in his mind. His thermos sat nearly empty in the holder. He'd already chewed through the last pack of gum and flicked between every FM station he could catch. Static. Some late-night preacher, a pop station fading in and out. Finally, he clicked the radio off altogether. The silence that followed pressed in, padded only by the steady thrum of the engine and the faint rattle from somewhere in the bunk where he'd stashed his duffel. He flexed his fingers on the wheel, noticing the faint ache in the tendons. His eyelids felt heavy around the edges, not dangerously so, but enough to make him wish he'd had just one more hour of sleep before hitting the road. He glanced at the CB, quiet on its bracket. Channel 19, the usual highway channel, showed on the small orange display. It had been nothing but soft hiss all night, as if every other driver on this stretch had decided talking wasn't worth the effort. He reached over and gave the volume knob a small twist, not really expecting anything. "You still with me up there?" The voice came out of the speaker so suddenly and so clearly that Daniel's hand jerked, almost knocking the mic off its hook. The sound was calm, with a slight drawl, like someone who'd grown up never needing to rush their words. For a second, Daniel wondered if he'd accidentally tuned into some old recording, a replay of a conversation that wasn't meant for him. Then the voice came again, slightly more amused this time. "Red Reefer, lone rig on 72 eastbound, you awake?" Daniel blinked, glanced in his mirrors. His trailer was, in fact, a deep red. The headlights behind him there were none. The road was empty in both directions. He reached slowly for the mic. 10 to 4, he said, feeling rusty on the radio shorthand. "I'm awake." "Who's this?" A short burst of faint static answered. Then the voice returned, warm and easy. "Name's Mark. Been running this stretch longer than I care to admit. You're looking a little drifty, friend. Daniel frowned slightly. You can see me? He asked, scanning the road ahead, then behind, expecting to catch sight of another trucker's beams in the distance. Not exactly, Mark said. Let's just say you're the only one out here picking up my signal right now, and I know what a tired truck feels like from a mile away. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. That obvious, huh? Obvious enough, Mark replied. You just passed mile 143 a minute ago. You got a gentle curve coming up, then a low spot where the fog likes to sit even on clear nights. You planning on making it to Thornville before sunup? The detail caught Daniel's attention. He glanced at the roadside just in time to see the green reflective sign, 144. And yes, the road began to bend left. He didn't remember seeing Thornville on his route sheet, but he had seen it in small letters on a blue services sign an hour ago. Yeah, Daniel said slowly. Thornville's my planned fuel stop. Then let's keep you between the lines till you get there, Mark said. Crack a window. Turn the fan up. You're slipping just a hair on the right, you know that? Daniel corrected automatically, easing the wheel a fraction. He hadn't been aware of drifting, but the center line did look better centered now in his lane. He hesitated. How do you know all that, he asked. You run with cameras out here or something? Mark chuckled, low and easy. Nothing so fancy, he said. I've just driven this highway so many times it's printed behind my eyes. Trust me, I know every bump. A bank of low mist appeared ahead, exactly where Mark had said it would, creeping across the road like breath on glass. Daniel instinctively eased off the accelerator, eyes narrowing. Don't brake hard, Mark advised, as if reading his thoughts. Just roll through. It's shallow. Traction's fine. Daniel did as he was told. The fog embraced the truck in a brief, shimmering gray hug, then fell away behind him. The pavement remained firm under his tires. He exhaled slowly, aware that his pulse had ticked upward. Appreciate the lookout, he said into the mic. Didn't think anyone else was out here. Most folks are hugging the other interstate this time of night, Mark answered. Quicker by a hair, less lonely. But this old road's got its charms. Something in the way he said it made the quiet around Daniel feel slightly less imposing. For the next 20 minutes they talked. Mark kept the conversation light, asking about Daniel's rig, where he'd started his run, how long he'd been driving. He shared small, harmless stories about bad coffee at remote truck stops, about times he'd seen deer staring from the brush like silent statues, about a gas station cat that used to jump into his cab at fueling time and refused to leave until bribed with jerky. Every so often, threaded through the easy talk, came another small warning or reminder. Watch that little dip after 158. Kicks to the right if you're not ready. Speed trap sometimes sits just over this hill. You're clear tonight, but don't make it a habit. See that stand of trees coming up on the left? If your reefer starts acting up, there's a pull-off just past it you can't see until you're on top of it. File that away. Each time, the details were exactly right. Daniel found his shoulders slowly unknotting. The heaviness in his eyelids eased, replaced by a quiet alertness. Having someone in his ear, someone who knew the road better than any map, steadied him. After a lull, he asked, You based out of Thornville, Mark? Used to be, came the reply, a faint shade of something unreadable in the words. Ran a lot of nights through here, knew all the regulars, fewer of them now. You on a run tonight? Daniel glanced at his side mirror again. Still nothing but his own trailer, ghostly white in the wash of his lights. Something like that, Mark said. Mostly I keep folks company. Make sure nobody makes the same mistakes I did. There was a pause. What kind of mistakes? Daniel asked quietly. Static filled the gap for a heartbeat, hissing softly in the confines of the cab. Pushing past tired, Mark said at last. Thinking you're fine because you want to get home, or get paid, or prove something. Not listening when the road starts to sound different. Despite the warmth in his tone, those last words sent a small shiver along Daniel's arms. Outside, the land rolled on in gentle waves. The sky was clear, stars pricked across it in cold pinpoints. A low orange glow far ahead hinted at a town or a cluster of highway lights. Daniel checked the clock. Nearly 2 a.m. The distance had slipped by faster than he'd realized. How far to Thornville now? He asked. 15 miles, give or take, Mark answered. You'll see the big blue sign in about 5. 3 truck stop logos on it. Only 2 of them are still open. Which ones? Daniel asked. Middle and right, Mark said without hesitation. Left one shut down a few years back. Some places don't know when to call it quits. Daniel smiled faintly, watching for the sign. The highway curved, dipped, and then there it was, a large reflective marker rising from the shoulder, promising food, fuel, and rest at exit 189. There were indeed 3 truck stop logos. The leftmost one was streaked and faded, letters hard to make out. The other 2 looked bright and current. Got that right, Daniel murmured. You aiming to park for a nap or just fuel and go? Mark asked. A nap'd be nice, Daniel admitted, glancing at his hours. Enough to keep me sharp on the back half. Take the middle stop then, Mark said. Lots wide, good sight lines. You'll sleep easier. Daniel had never heard someone talk about parking lots like they were safe harbors, but there was something reassuring about it. He hesitated, then said, Where are you parked, Mark? You at Thornville too? The CB was quiet for a second. When Mark spoke again, his voice had gone softer. Not exactly, he said, but I'll be with you up to the exit. Daniel felt for the first time a small wrong note under the comfort. A fleeting thought passed through his mind, that for all he knew, he might be talking to someone 100 miles away, or no one at all. Interference. A prank. Something strange bouncing off the ionosphere. You run this channel every night? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Most nights, Mark replied. When I can. Some folks hear me. Most don't. That's all right. The ones who need to, do. You said you made mistakes, Daniel said. That you don't want others to make the same ones. That happen out here? A quiet settled over the line. Different from static, a kind of listening. Yeah, Mark said at last. Right out here. Mile 201. You'll pass it on your way out, after Thornville. The way he said the number fixed it in Daniel's mind. Fell asleep? Daniel asked gently. Don't remember falling, Mark answered. Just remember thinking I was fine. Next thing I knew, I'd put my rig where it had no business being. Took a couple cars with me. After that well, let's just say, I didn't finish the run. He stated it calmly, without self-pity, but Daniel's throat tightened anyway. Sorry, he said, feeling how inadequate the word was. Nothing for you to be sorry about, Mark said. Just promise me you won't try to push past what your body can do. Road doesn't care why you're tired. The orange glow ahead grew brighter, resolving into the scattered lights of Thornville's outskirts. Billboards appeared more frequently, half-lit signs for diners and motels sliding by. Exits coming up, Mark said quietly. Right after that little overpass. Get yourself some rest, Daniel. You're not coming in? Daniel asked. A faint chuckle. Not my stop, Mark said. I'll be around though. Lot of miles out here. Lot of nights. Daniel wanted to ask more. Where exactly are you? How do you know my name? Why are you really talking to me? But the questions tangled in his chest. The exit sign loomed, reflective letters bright in his headlights. 189. Thornville, divided by State Route 12. He flicked on his turn signal. The rhythmic click loud in the cab. The off-ramp curved gently right, leading him away from the main highway's dark flow. As the truck glided down toward the cluster of truck stop lights, he thumbed the mic one last time. Hey, Mark? A soft crackle. Yeah? Thanks, Daniel said. For the company. And the warnings. For the first time, there was something like emotion behind the other man's voice. You're welcome, Mark said. Get some sleep. And remember mile 201. That's where you don't do what I did. The signal faded out as smoothly as a dimmer being turned. No long static, no abrupt cut, just a gentle thinning until only the hiss remained. Daniel parked in the middle truck stop, just as Mark had suggested. The lot was indeed wide and neatly laid out, with lines bright enough to see even under the orange sodium lamps. A few other rigs slept in their rows, engines ticking as they cooled. He fueled, grabbed a coffee he barely sipped, then finally crawled into the bunk. The weight of the night pressed in now that the lighted world had shrunk to the inside of his cab. He lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the reefer and the occasional distant whine of tires on the highway. He thought about Mark's voice, about the precise knowledge of the road, about the way he'd mentioned mile 201. The feeling that had started as comfort had shifted now into something more complicated. Gratitude, braided with unease. Eventually, fatigue tipped him over. He slept hard, dreamless, waking just before dawn with the thin gray light of early morning filtering through the windshield. After a quick shower and a fresh cup of coffee, he pulled back onto the highway. The world looked different in daylight. Flat fields revealed their shades of brown and green. Farmhouses stood clear against the horizon, and the sky was a soft wash of pale blue. Traffic had picked up. A few other trucks moved in his direction, cars sprinkled between them. The emptiness of the previous night felt like a memory from another place. Still, as the miles slipped by, Daniel watched the markers. 196, 197, 198. He could have changed the station on the CB, could have switched it off entirely, but he left it where it was channel 19, low volume, hiss filling the background. 199, Lambe. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel as the next sign approached. Lambelingi. There was nothing remarkable about it at first glance. The highway ran straight, the pavement smooth. A shallow ditch sloped away on his right. Beyond it, a line of trees and a glimpse of an old fence. On the left, a narrow median and the westbound lanes paralleling his own. Then, just ahead, he saw them. A series of faint scars in the grass along the shoulder. Parallel grooves, grown over but still visible, like the ghost of tires that had once bitten in hard. A section of bent guardrail had been replaced with newer metal, its sheen subtly different from the rest. Daniel's throat went dry. The CB crackled. For an instant, he thought he heard Mark's voice again, barely louder than the static. "Keep it steady," it seemed to say, the words thin and distant. "Eyes open, hands on, don't follow me." The impression was so faint he couldn't be sure if it had been real or something his tired mind was supplying. He kept his rig centered, gaze steady on the road ahead. No sudden moves. No unnecessary glances into the ditch. Where the past felt closest, the moment passed. The scars slipped behind him. The highway continued, ordinary and unbroken. At the next truck stop, he mentioned Mark in passing to an older driver over coffee, more as a test than anything else. "Guy on 19 kept me awake last night," Daniel said. "Knows this road like the back of his hand. Said his name was Mark. You ever hear him?" The older driver, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and a ball cap faded from sun, looked up sharply. "Mark?" he repeated. "Runs nights? Knows every mile marker? Talks like he's been out here forever?" "Yeah," Daniel said slowly. The man exhaled through his nose, leaning back. "Been hearing about him for years," he said. "First time I caught his voice, I was still green. Helped me through a bad stretch of black ice up north. Tried to meet him at a rest area. Fella never showed." Daniel felt a chill trace his spine. "You think he's messing with people?" he asked. The older driver shook his head. "Nah," he said quietly. "I think he's stuck. Out here. Some say he died in a pileup near mile 201 back in the 80s. Others say he walked away, but never quite made it off the road in his head. I don't know, but drivers talk. Far as I've heard, he's never steered anyone wrong." Daniel stared into his coffee, the steam winding upward in faint, curling threads. "Do you believe all that?" he asked. The man shrugged, eyes dropping back to his plate. "I believe this," he said. "A lot of bad things almost happen in this line of work. Sometimes they don't, because somebody warns you at the right time. Whether that somebody's in a truck behind you or on the other side of whatever, doesn't much matter if you get to go home." On his next run along that stretch of highway, deep into another night, Daniel kept the CB on. The hiss filled the cab, steady as breathing. Miles passed. Towns slid by, their lights dim under the wide, star-scattered sky. Then, somewhere near mile 140, a familiar voice slipped through the static, as casual as if they'd spoken only an hour before. "You still with me up there?" Daniel picked up the mic, feeling the edges of sleepiness retreat like a tide. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm here." And out on the listening highway, the road unspooled ahead, watched over by someone who had once missed his stop and now seemed determined to make sure others did not. Story number 3. Maria had never liked the feeling of being watched, but the new camera made it impossible to forget. It sat just above the windshield in the center of the cab, a small black square with a glass eye. Company policy, they'd said. Forward-facing and inward-facing. Recording all the time. Safety, liability, insurance. They'd given a whole briefing about it at the yard, a smiling rep explaining how the footage would only be reviewed in the event of harsh braking or collision. No one mentioned how it would feel to spend most of the night alone with that unblinking dot of glass pointed at her face. That evening, the highway across the northern plains was an empty black ribbon, cut into neat pieces by the white lines flashing under her headlights. It was close to midnight. The sky was a long, low ceiling of cloud. No stars, no moon, just a faint lighter gray on the horizon, where some distant town lay hidden. Maria shifted in the driver's seat, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness. The reefer trailer hummed steadily behind her, a quiet, mechanical heartbeat. The dash glowed with familiar green and amber lights. Her coffee in the cup holder had cooled to lukewarm hours ago. She had always liked night runs. Less traffic, fewer impatient cars weaving around her. No rush hour jams. Just the long, measured rhythm of miles. Tonight, though, she felt an odd restlessness edging her concentration. Maybe it was just the camera. A small, built-in screen to her right showed a live view from it when the truck was in motion. A split view, road ahead on top and cab interior below. It was meant for calibration, they said, but there was no way to turn it completely off. She'd stuck a piece of tape over the bottom half once, only to get a sharp email from safety about obstructing company equipment. So now she tried to ignore the tiny moving picture of herself, lit by the dash and instrument panel, hands steady on the wheel, the dark shape of the sleeper behind her. The company had put her in this unit last week, a newer Freightliner with the upgraded tech package. She missed her old truck, a slightly battered Peterbilt that felt like a worn-in pair of boots. This one still smelled faintly of plastic and cleaning products. The mattress in the bunk was too firm. The mirrors were a little too perfect. But work was work. Freight needed moving. The load tonight was a rush job, fresh produce, heading east before the weekend. Tight schedule, no slack time. Dispatch had frowned at the idea of her stopping long before dawn. "You're good for it," they told her on the phone. "You've done worse." She had, back when she was younger, when sleeping in 2-hour snatches and living on coffee and adrenaline felt normal. These days, she tried to be more careful. Nights were longer now. The dark pressed closer along the windshield. The CB was on low, mostly static with the occasional distant voice, too faint to make out. Maria hummed tunelessly under her breath, trying to keep her brain occupied. The first call came just past 12:30. Her phone, mounted in its cradle on the dash, buzzed and lit up with the company's number. She frowned. Safety or dispatch, calling at this hour, rarely meant anything good. She tapped the hands-free button. "Yeah, this is Maria." "Maria, this is Jeff in safety," a man's voice said, brisk but not unkind. "You got a minute?" She glanced out at the empty lanes stretching ahead. "Far as I can see," she said. "What's up?" There was a brief crackle of keyboard noise on his end. The clatter of an office somewhere far from the road. "We got an alert from your inward-facing camera," Jeff said. "Looks like you've got a passenger in the cab." Maria blinked, then snorted softly. "I don't," she said. "Company policy, you know that." "I know," Jeff replied. "That's why I'm calling. Our system flagged your last event about 5 minutes ago. Hard cornering it triggers a short video clip. When I pulled it up, it looked like someone was sitting on your lower bunk." Maria's hands tightened on the wheel for a second. "There's nobody here but me," she said. "Check my logs. I'm solo on this run." "I believe you," Jeff said quickly. "Could be a reflection or a jacket hung just right. Mind doing me a favor and glancing back there? Just so we can note it and clear the alert." She glanced at the camera's preview screen. The cab view showed her the steering wheel, and behind, a slice of the dark curtain she usually kept half drawn across the bunk. Nothing stood out. Still, she felt a small reluctance to actually turn and look, as if saying the words, "There's no one there," had invited doubt into the cab. She forced a half laugh. "Hang on," she said. Keeping one hand on the wheel, she glanced quickly over her right shoulder. The sleeper was exactly as she'd left it at the start of the shift. Blanket folded, duffel bag at the foot, a plaid flannel shirt hanging on the baggery, hook by the wall. No one sitting on the mattress. No shadows out of place. Empty, she said, returning her eyes to the road. Unless your camera sees ghosts. Jeff gave a short chuckle, but it didn't carry much humor. Wouldn't be the first time someone said that, he muttered. What was that? Maria asked. Nothing, he said. Probably a glitch. I'll note it as a false positive. Sorry to bother you. It's fine, she said, breaks up the monotony. He hesitated. Stay alert out there, he added. You've been running some long nights lately. Roger that, she said, and the call ended with a soft click. She drove on, the conversation lingering in her mind like a piece of grit under the skin. The idea that someone, somewhere in a bright office, was watching clips of her driving at night felt intrusive. The idea that they thought they'd seen someone with her felt stranger. She told herself it was nothing. The interior lights, the half-open curtain, the pattern on the blanket, all of it could have fooled the software. The system drew little green boxes around anything it thought was a person. She'd seen it misidentify a hanging jacket before. Still, when she flicked her eyes to the preview screen again, she studied the shadowy shape of the bunk more closely than before. Headlights flashed in her rearview mirror. A sedan passed, its taillights shrinking rapidly into the distance. For a while, there was nothing but the road. An hour later, as the monotony of the dark began to wear at her focus, she saw something on the screen that made her breath catch. The cab view showed her as usual, lit by the instruments. Behind her, the curtain hung in a slightly different fold than earlier, a dark vertical line. On the bunk, her folded blanket was a pale rectangle. At the very edge of the frame, near the bottom right corner, something moved. It was small, just a shift of darker against dark, as if a shadow had thickened, then relaxed. If she hadn't been half watching the screen already, she might have missed it. Maria's eyes darted from the road to the screen and back again. The movement did not repeat. The image settled into stillness, the camera's low-light mode turning everything a grainy gray. The rational part of her brain ran through possibilities. Vibration causing something to sway. The camera auto-adjusting focus. A trick of her tired eyes. She told herself not to be ridiculous. She adjusted her grip on the wheel, feeling the familiar textured leather under her palms. Miles clicked by. The road surface changed slightly, the hum under her tires deepening as they crossed onto an older section of asphalt. The wind picked up, nudging the trailer gently. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed again. This time, the number displayed was a general company line, not safety. She answered with a touch more impatience. Maria. Hey, it's Jeff again, came the same voice, sounding a little tighter. Sorry to bug you twice in one night. You're fine, she said, though her stomach had tightened. What now? We got another clip, he said. The system flags anything that looks like distraction. A few minutes ago, you looked away from the road for longer than normal. It's probably just you checking your mirrors, but that figure's still in the footage. There is no figure, Maria said, more sharply than she intended. I hear you, he said, but the software disagrees. And, well, so do my eyes. There was a brief rustling as he pulled up something on his end. I'm emailing you a still frame, he said. When you get a safe moment, take a look. I just want to know what you think you're seeing there, so I can tell the tech guys. Fine, she said. The email pinged into her phone's inbox a minute later. She waited until the highway straightened for a long, flat stretch, then quickly tapped it open. The image that appeared was a still shot from her cab camera, tinted slightly greenish by the night mode. There she was in the lower left, hands on the wheel, jaw set, eyes on the road. Behind her, the curtain and bunk, and on the bunk, sitting very near the edge, was a shape. It was humanoid in outline. Shoulders slightly hunched, head bowed, hands or what might be hands resting loosely on knees. No details of face or clothing showed, just a darker presence against the gray. But the proportions were unmistakable. It was not a trick of the blanket or a pile of gear. The person was seated only a couple of feet behind her right shoulder. Maria's heart thudded once, hard. She made herself breathe, slow and deep, eyes flicking back up to the real road. The bunk, in her peripheral vision, remained empty. She could see it clearly now, in her side mirror's reflection blanket. Duffel, flannel shirt. No one sitting there. No weight on the mattress. Nothing. She tapped her headset. Got the picture, she said, keeping her tone level. That's gotta be a software artifact, Jeff. There's nothing there. There was a beat of quiet on the line. Maybe, he said. But the other inward cameras on the fleet don't do this. And, look, off the record, that truck you're in has had a few complaints. What kind of complaints? She asked. Drivers saying the camera shows someone in the sleeper when they're alone, a hand on the curtain, face in the upper bunk, that kind of thing. He paused. Most chalk it up to being tired. A couple turned their units back in after one run and refused to drive that truck again. Maria let out a long breath through her nose. You didn't think to mention any of this when you assigned it to me? She asked. We don't exactly put that in the equipment list, he said, trying for humor and mostly failing. Besides, the techs tore the system apart. They replaced the camera, the wiring, the mount. Whatever that is, it's not a known bug. Officially, it's nothing. And unofficially? Maria asked. On the other end, something in his tone shifted. Unofficially, he said slowly. The truck you're in used to belong to a driver named Connor. He ran nights on that same northern corridor. 3 years ago, he didn't wake up from a break. Carbon monoxide from a bad auxiliary heater, they think. He was parked at one of those little pull-offs past mile 220. Nobody found him till afternoon. Maria's grip on the wheel tightened. Same unit? She asked. Same VIN? Same VIN, Jeff confirmed. Company refurbished it. New paint, new mattress, new everything. But some of the drivers who know the story started calling it Connor's truck behind the scenes. Couple of them swear they've seen him on the camera. I don't love that rumor getting around. Spooks people. Maria swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. That's a nice thing to tell me while I'm halfway through a 13-hour night, she said. Sorry, he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. Look, you're solid. You've got good numbers, good safety record. If anybody can prove it's just a glitch, it's you. Just, if you start feeling off, promise me you'll pull over at a proper rest stop. Don't use those little unlit pull-offs. Not in that truck. Not at night. The seriousness in his voice cut through the attempt at lightness. I wasn't planning to pull off anyway, she said. I'm aiming for the big service plaza near mile 240. Nap there before dawn. Do that, Jeff said. And Maria? Yeah? If that bunk starts looking occupied, just don't talk to it. Okay? Despite herself, she almost laughed. Copy that, she said. No chatting with empty mattresses. They hung up. The cab felt smaller afterward, as if each word of the story had taken up a little more space inside. She drove on. The highway rolled beneath her, stretching through patches of darker forest and lighter open land. Wind buffeted the sides of the trailer now and then, gentle but insistent. The world outside the windshield narrowed to the reach of her headlights and the faint green glow of signs. She tried not to look at the preview screen. When her eyes slipped to it anyway, she saw only her own reflection, the dim suggestion of the sleeper, the half-open curtain, time blurred. Mile markers counted silently up. At some point after 3 a.m., the first real wave of fatigue hit. It wasn't a dramatic thing, just a slow thickening at the edges of her thoughts. A heaviness behind her eyes. The lines on the road seemed to stretch just a little longer between each flash. She rolled down the window a crack, letting cold night air whistle into the cab. The smell of damp earth and faint exhaust filled her nose, sharp enough to make her blink. You're fine, she muttered to herself. Plaza's not far. The wind brought with it a scent she didn't expect, something faintly sweet, like an old cologne or aftershave, the kind that clung to fabric and lingered around lockers. It threaded through the usual smells so subtly she almost didn't notice. Her heart gave a small, involuntary jump. She sniffed again. Gone. Just diesel and cold air. The sensation of not being alone crept up on her slowly, like a shadow lengthening as a light source moves. There was no one thing she could point to, no sound, no shift in temperature she could measure. But the empty space in the sleeper behind her felt occupied in some almost perceptible way. Her mind circled the story Jeff had told her. A driver falling asleep with an exhaust leak. An empty truck found at a roadside pull-off hours later. No struggle, no dramatic scene. Just someone who closed his eyes and never opened them again. She imagined him sitting back there on the bunk in the footage, watching the road over her shoulder. The idea made the skin at the back of her neck prickle. Fatigue playing tricks, she said out loud. as if speaking might anchor reality. Something soft sounded from behind her then, just loud enough to hear over the engine a faint creak, like weight settling onto a mattress. She froze, every muscle going tense. The truck rolled on, steady. It could have been the road flexing the frame. It could have been nothing. But she could not remember hearing the bunk make that particular noise when it was empty. Against her better judgment, her eyes darted to the preview screen. The bunk, in the camera's night vision glow, was not empty. The dark shape from the still image was there again, clearer now, sitting closer to the aisle. Shoulders slightly hunched, head angled, as if looking past her at the windshield. No face visible, just a deeper void where one should have been. Her real bunk, visible in the rearview mirror, looked unchanged, but on screen, it was occupied. Maria's throat constricted. For a moment, her mind insisted she was looking at some live overlay, some glitch repeating an old clip. But the angle of her own head, the position of her hands, were exactly as she was in that moment. Not a recording, a live feed. She forced her gaze back to the asphalt. Miles to the plaza, she thought. Just get to the plaza. Don't pull over somewhere dark. Don't stop where no one can see you. The next 10 miles stretched like a test. The dark figure remained in the corner of the screen, still and silent. She refused to look at it again, watching only the road, the glow of upcoming signs. When the green reflective Logan Ridge Service Plaza 2-mile sign finally appeared, a tight knot loosened in her chest. The exit came soon after, a broad, gentle curve leading under bright poles of light. She followed the arrows toward the truck parking area, rows of spaces marked out on the clean asphalt. Other rigs slept there, engines off or idling low. Sodium lamps cast a soft orange over the lot. The world, for the first time in hours, felt normal again. A place where things stayed, where they were put, and strangers kept to their own business. She found an open slot toward the edge, backed the trailer in carefully, and set the brake with a firm pull. The engine's roar faded to a steady idle. She shut off the headlights. The cab light, when she flicked it on, filled the space with simple, ordinary illumination. She turned in her seat, slowly. The bunk was blank. No indentation in the cushion, no sign of anyone sitting there, just her folded blanket, her duffel, the hanging flannel shirt. The camera's preview, now switching to full color in the bright interior, showed the same. Her knees felt weak in a way she hated to admit. She swung down from the driver's seat and stood for a second, hands braced on the edge of the bunk, feeling the solid, unmoving frame under her palms. After a moment, she grabbed her pillow and blanket, and almost on impulse, climbed out of the cab entirely. The night air in the plaza was cold but comforting, carrying the low rumble of nearby trucks, the occasional hiss of air brakes, the far-off murmur of voices from the building. Inside, she found the driver's lounge-worn armchairs, a TV playing some late-night show with the sound off, a coffee machine that had seen better days. A couple of other drivers dozed in seats, ball caps pulled down over their eyes. For the first time in years, she chose not to sleep in her own truck. She tucked herself into one of the lounge chairs instead, blanket over her, pillow wedged against the wall. She slept in snatches, dreams vague and restless. Once, half awake, she thought she smelled that faint cologne again, but when she opened her eyes, the lounge was the same scuffed linoleum, humming vending machines, an old clock ticking on the wall. Morning came with a pale wash of daylight seeping in around the shades. She washed up, grabbed breakfast, then walked back out to her truck with a cautious unease coiled in her chest. The cab sat where she'd left it, unremarkable among the rows of metal and glass. When she climbed back in, the air inside was cool and smelled only of her own things. Her phone buzzed with a new email from Safety. Subject: Inward cam alert. Logan Ridge Plaza. Event cleared. The text was simple. System recorded no anomalies during stationary period. No further action required. She checked the inward camera feed one last time. It showed her own face, more tired in the daylight, and the neat, empty bunk behind. The rest of the run passed without incident. The camera behaved. No more phantom passengers appeared on her screen. By the time she dropped the load and turned in her paperwork, the whole night had taken on a hazy, almost unreal quality in her memory. Almost. 2 weeks later, back at the yard, she was parked beside the fuel island when a younger driver wandered over, eyeing her truck. "You're in 418 now?" he asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Yeah, Maria said, glancing at the unit number stenciled near the door. Why? He whistled softly. You ever get any weird camera alerts? He asked. Like they think you got a rider when you don't? She looked at him carefully. You? She asked. He nodded, eyes flicking to the inward camera, just visible through the windshield. Ran it last month before they reassigned me, he said. Kept getting emails in the middle of the night. Safety wanting to know who the guy in my bunk was. He gave a forced laugh. Told them if they were seeing anybody, I hoped he'd help with the driving. Did he? Maria asked quietly. The younger driver hesitated. I don't know, he said. Couple of times, right before I started to nod, the system chimed and flagged me, like somebody waved at the camera. Kept me from drifting off. He rubbed the back of his neck. After the third night, I asked for a different truck. Just felt crowded, I guess. Maria thought of the faint cologne, the creak of the mattress, the dark figure sitting in that grainy green light. They tell you about Connor? She asked. The younger man shook his head. Who's that? No one they officially mention, she said. Just someone who used to be here. On your bad nights, if that camera says you've got company, maybe just listen and don't argue. He studied her for a moment, trying to decide if she was joking. The look in her eyes told him she wasn't, not entirely. You still driving it? He asked. For now, she said. It runs fine. And I sleep at the plazas. He nodded slowly, glancing once more at the little black square above the windshield. That night, when Maria headed out again, the sky was clearer. A few stars pricked through the dark, faint but real. The miles unrolled beneath her tires in their familiar rhythm. The camera watched, unblinking. Hours into the drive, when the road grew quiet and her mind began to cloud with the first hints of fatigue, the inward monitor flickered. For a second, no more she thought she saw a shapeshift on the bunk behind her, like someone sitting up from a long rest. She didn't turn around. She didn't speak. Point taken, she murmured instead, easing her grip on the wheel, focusing her eyes. I'm awake. The image on the screen settled. The bunk looked empty again. Out on the highway, caught between darkness and headlight glow, the truck rolled on, carrying with it one driver of flesh and blood, and something else that seemed intent on making sure no one else fell asleep forever in that narrow, lonely space just behind the seats. Story number 4. The rain had been waiting all day to fall. When it finally came, it did so all at once. Evan watched it smear across the windshield in fast, slanting lines, wipers working on high and still barely keeping up. The highway ahead was a silver ribbon under his headlights, painted with reflections of taillights far in the distance. Every puddle a small distorted mirror of light. He'd run this route a dozen times eastbound across 3 states with a loaded box trailer behind him, furniture and housewares stacked neat and tight. He knew the major landmarks, the stretches to be wary of in winter, the places where fog liked to sit heavy over the road. Tonight, the only real hazard was the rain and fatigue. The digital clock on the dash showed 1:19 a.m. His logbook said he was legal, just inside the window, but his body argued. The hours of driving, the steady hiss of tires on wet pavement, the monotonous flash of the road lines had begun to press on the back of his eyes. He took a long sip from his insulated mug. The coffee inside had cooled from hot to merely warm, but the bitter taste helped. On the right shoulder, a green reflective sign emerged from the curtain of rain. Way station. 2 miles. Trucks, buses, RVs. Evan let out a breath. He'd forgotten for a moment about the station on this stretch. It wasn't always open. Most nights, the electronic board over the lane flashed closed and he rolled on by. But on stormy nights, enforcement sometimes got ambitious. Sure enough, a mile later, an electronic sign above the shoulder announced in bright amber letters, "Way station open, all trucks next right." He flicked on his right turn signal out of habit. Some drivers would have slipped by, used the weather as an excuse, trusted their luck. Evan wasn't built that way. Tickets cost money he didn't have to spare. Ahead, through the rain, he could see the faint outline of the way station complex. A low, flat-roofed building with a long canopy extending over the scale lanes. Sodium lights cast yellow puddles on the wet concrete. The whole place looked like a small island of light in the dark countryside. He eased his rig onto the deceleration lane, water hissing under the tires, and followed the arrows painted on the ground. No other trucks were ahead of him. The lot felt empty, the building's windows dark except for a single glowing rectangle near the center. The OPN divided by closed sign above the main lane showed a green go. A smaller sign below it read, "Proceed to scale at 5 miles per hour. Do not stop on ramp." He rolled forward, crossing a series of thick white lines. A sensor somewhere buzzed faintly, and another sign lit up in response. "Pull forward, stop on scale." Evan did as instructed, carefully bringing the truck to rest with his steer axle just past the painted mark. The rain drummed on the roof of the cab, a steady, insistent patter. On a pole to his left, a small digital display brightened. It flickered for a second, then settled on a gross weight reading that matched, within a few hundred pounds, what he expected from his bills. He watched for the usual instructions, either "Oak to bypass" or "Park and see officer." Instead, the display stayed on his weight, then added a single word beneath it. "Wait." Evan frowned. He flicked his eyes toward the building. In the lit window, he could see a hazy figure move someone standing up, crossing behind the glass. A second later, the intercom crackled to life from a speaker near the scale. "Truck on scale 1, a man's voice said, slightly muffled but clear. "Trailer 8947, Lane Logistics." "That you, Evan?" Hearing his name made him straighten in surprise. Yes, sir," he said, leaning toward his open driver's window. "That's me. Park in slot 3, and come inside with your paperwork," the voice said. "Got a couple of things to check." "Yes, sir," Evan replied automatically. The light over the lane switched from green to amber. A smaller sign ahead blinked, "Park and report inside." He eased off the scale and into the lot. Slot 3 was marked by a faded sign on a concrete stop. He backed in carefully, set his brake, and let the engine idle for a moment while he gathered his folder. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time he climbed down. The air was cool and smelled of wet asphalt, damp grass, and something faintly metallic. His boots splashed through shallow puddles as he made his way across the lot toward the main door. The building up close looked older than he'd expected. The brickwork was clean but worn, edges softened by weather and time. The glass door bore a state seal that had faded to a pale, ghostly outline. A fluorescent light above the doorway flickered once, then steadied as he approached. He pulled the door open. A bell on a spring chimed softly overhead, the sound oddly old-fashioned. Inside, the air was dry and smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. A counter stretched across the front of the room, with a metal turnstile at one end. Posters about axle weights and braking distances lined the walls, their corners slightly curled. A coffee pot sat on a hot plate behind the counter, half full and dark. Behind the counter, in the glow from several monitors, sat a man in a crisp uniform shirt. He was older, hair gone mostly gray, face lined in a way that suggested long hours and a lot of weather. His name tag read Hollis. He looked up as Evan entered, eyes brightening with recognition that Evan found strange. "Evening," Hollis said. "Or what's left of it. You must be the 8947 trailer." "Yes, sir," Evan said, stepping up to the counter and sliding his paperwork across. "Everything should be in order." I scaled out at the shipper. Hollis took the documents, flipping through them with practiced fingers. "Preloaded trailer?" he asked. "Yeah," Evan said. "They sealed it before I got there." I checked the gross on their scale. Hollis nodded, glancing at a monitor to his right. Evan could just see, reflected faintly in the glass, an overhead view of his truck sitting on the scale earlier. "You're a touch heavy on that back axle," Hollis said calmly. "Nothing crazy, but enough to get you a ticket if a trooper's feeling unfriendly. You slide your tandems after you left?" Evan shook his head. "Didn't think I needed to," he said. "They told me I was good." Hollis made a soft sound that might have been amusement. "Shippers tell a lot of things," he said. "State troopers tell the rest." He signed something on a form, then looked up again, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Evan's face. "You been running hard?" he asked. Evan felt the question land in a way that was more observation than accusation. "Long day," he admitted, "but I'm within my hours." Hollis's gaze flicked to a wall clock. Evan followed his eyes. The clock showed 1:27 a.m., its hands ticking steadily. Behind the clock, partially hidden by its frame, hung a cheap wall calendar. The picture was of a mountain lake. The month at the top read October. The year, in small numerals, made Evan blink. It was more than a decade in the past. He told himself it was just an old calendar someone hadn't bothered to take down. Government buildings did that sometimes. Storms getting worse up ahead, Hollis said, drawing Evan's attention back. Rivers up. Winds gusty on that bridge. I heard, Evan said. Was planning to cross, and then shut down at the big truck stop on the other side. Hollis's fingers tapped lightly on the paperwork. I'd recommend you don't cross that bridge tonight, he said. Not with that load and that axle spread. You got options. Evan frowned. Options? He repeated. Nearest fuel, showers, all that is past the river. There's a secondary route south you can take, Hollis said. Add some miles. But the grades are kinder, and you skip the bridge. You can catch the interstate again past the floodplain. He reached for a notepad and scribbled a quick set of directions, exit numbers, county road names. His handwriting was old-fashioned, but neat. Evan glanced at the paper. I didn't see anything on the GPS about that, he said. GPS doesn't know everything, Hollis replied. These roads been here longer than those satellites. You run enough years, you get to know the ones that don't show up in a quick search. Evan felt a flicker of unease then. Something about Hollis's tone, the way he spoke as if he'd been sitting in this building a very long time, watching storm after storm roll through. You just worry about your route, Hollis added almost gently. I'll worry about that weight. Slide your tandems back 3 holes before you leave. Get your axles under limit. And don't cross the river tonight. He said the last part with a quiet emphasis that sank under Evan's skin like cold water. Is it really that bad? Evan asked. It's just rain, right? Hollis's jaw worked for a moment, as if he were considering how much to say. Wind on that bridge does strange things when the river's high, he said. Couple years back, we had a tanker go over. Driver hit a gust mid-span. Took out half the guardrail. They never did find the trailer whole. He didn't add details. He didn't have to. The bare facts painted enough picture. It's your call, Hollis went on. I can't force you. All I can do is advise. His eyes met Evan's. And I'm advising you to take the long way. You'll still make your delivery window. You cut it close if you don't sleep, is all. And you're already halfway to tired. Evan looked down at the directions in his hand. The ink was starting to feather slightly at the edges from the dampness in the air. Almost feels like you've seen my logbook, he said, trying for lightness. Hollis didn't smile. I've seen a lot of logbooks, he said quietly, and a lot of faces that thought they could push 1 more hour. The lobby felt cooler suddenly. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Evan shifted his weight. You mentioned a tanker going over, he said. Was that recent? Hollis's gaze slid past him, toward the rain-speckled front windows. Depends what you call recent, he said. Time's funny out here. One storm feels a lot like the last. For a brief moment, the room seemed to dim, as if a cloud had passed directly over the building. The fluorescent lights flickered and steadied. When they brightened again, Evan caught sight of something in the window glass, a reflection that made his breath hitch. In the rain-blurred pane, overlaid on the darkness outside, he saw the faint image of the parking lot. 3 trucks sat there. One was his own, familiar shape and company logo. The second was a tanker with an older design, the kind he didn't see much anymore. The third was a flatbed with wooden stakes, no load. He hadn't seen any other rigs when he'd pulled in. He turned his head quickly to look out the actual window. The lot beyond the glass was nearly empty. Only his own truck sat under the sodium lights, rain tracing lines down its sides. When he looked back at the reflection, the other trucks were gone. The skin on his arms prickled. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Maybe it was a trick of angle, his glasses, the way the interior lights played off the glass. That was all. Hollis slid his paperwork back across the counter. You're good to roll once you slide those tandems, he said. No ticket tonight. Thank you, Evan said, his voice sounding a little dry in his own ears. And Evan? Hollis added just as he turned to go. Yeah? Watch your right front tire, the older man said. Inside sidewall's not as sound as you think. You can make it plenty long if you don't push it in a crosswind. But don't flirt with it on wet steel if you don't have to. Evan blinked. I did my pre-trip, he said. Tires checked out. I know you did, Hollis said. Check it again when you can, and don't cross the river tonight. The repetition of that warning settled deep in Evan's mind. He stepped back out into the drizzle, pulling the door closed behind him. The bell chimed its little note once more. As he crossed the lot, he glanced over his shoulder at the building. From this angle, with the interior lights reflecting off the glass, he couldn't see inside. The windows were dark rectangles. The fluorescent above the door buzzed, then flared a little brighter. He climbed back into the cab, rainwater dripping from his jacket. The familiar smell of his own truck fabric, coffee, a hint of fast food wrapped around him like a small refuge. He set the paperwork aside and flipped on his interior light long enough to check his right front tire in the mirror. In the yellowish glow from the lot, it looked fine. No bulges, no obvious damage. Still, as he climbed back down to slide his tandems, he walked around to that tire, crouched, and ran his fingers along the inside sidewall. For a moment, everything felt normal, cold rubber, bits of grit, the slight give when he pressed. Then, near the rear, he felt a faint irregularity. Not a bulge exactly, but a patch that seemed softer than the rest, as if the cords beneath had begun to separate ever so slightly. It was the kind of thing a hurried inspection might miss, the kind of thing that might not matter at all on a calm, dry night with no extra stress, the kind of thing that could, given just the right gust and just the right angle on a slick bridge deck, make itself suddenly very important. Evan straightened slowly. "Okay," he said under his breath to no one in particular. He slid his tandems as instructed, locked them, and climbed back into the cab. The directions Hollis had written lay on the passenger seat, the ink dark against the paper. His GPS, when he punched in his destination, suggested the usual route over the river. No hint of the southern road Hollis had mentioned. He could have ignored the scribbled detour, blamed the old man's caution on nerves and superstition. Instead, he took a breath, eased his rig out of the lot, and followed the hand-drawn directions when the exit arrived. The secondary road was narrower, 2 lanes with a center line glistening in his high beams. It wound through low hills and patches of woods, past dark farmhouses and the occasional mailbox. The rain lightened as he drove, finally tapering off to a fine mist. 40 minutes later, he rejoined the interstate on the far side of the river floodplain. The bridge he would have taken was a distant set of lights now, barely discernible over the low ground to his left. He might have forgotten about the way station after that, filed it under slightly odd encounters, and moved on. But an hour later, as he rolled into the big truck stop where he'd planned to rest, one of the TVs in the driver's lounge caught his eye. A news report played with the sound up. Footage showed emergency vehicles clustered at one end of a bridge, their red and blue lights painting the wet asphalt. A truck, sideways across 2 lanes, blocked most of the span. Its rear wheels had chewed into the guardrail, which hung twisted and broken over the dark water below. "No injuries reported," the anchor was saying. The driver of the truck says he felt a sudden pull as his front right tire blew, causing him to swerve. Authorities say the situation could have been much worse, if not for the reduced traffic at this late hour. Evan stepped closer. On the screen, the reporter pointed to the shredded remains of a tire near the lowered camera angle. The words "River Bridge" appeared at the bottom of the shot. According to the banner, the incident had happened just after 2 a.m. Evan glanced at the clock over the counter. 2:27 a.m. He felt a cold, almost dizzy sensation in his chest. He thought of Hollis's warning, of the way the older man had said don't cross the river tonight like it was something he'd rehearsed. Later that morning, when the sun had finally burned off the last of the mist, Evan pulled out his phone and searched for the way station to mark it in his notes. Maybe he'd drop a line to safety at his company, let them know about the helpful officer there. The official state site listed way stations along that corridor. It showed 2 on the westbound side, 1 on the east. The eastbound station he'd stopped at was marked as permanently closed, with a note. Facility decommissioned 8 years ago. He frowned, checked the address against his odometer log. It matched. Same mile marker, same little side road. A location they now described as an inactive facility, no longer in service. Curious and unsettled, Evan made a mental note. On his return trip a few days later, in broad daylight and under a clear sky, he took the exit again. The driveway to the old way station was gated off, a rusted chain looped through metal posts. Weeds grew up through cracks in the pavement. The canopy over the scales stood empty and sun-faded. The building itself had boards over some of the windows. The state seal on the glass door was still visible, but flaked and pale. A notice was taped there. Rain warped and illegible from a distance. No fresh tire tracks marked the lot. He sat there a moment in his truck, engine idling, staring at the silent building. The night with Hollis' bright interior lights, humming monitors. The smell of office coffee felt like a memory from a different version of the world entirely. He didn't climb the fence. He didn't walk up to read the sign. Some part of him didn't want to disturb whatever lay settled there. Instead, he put the rig back in gear and eased onto the interstate. After that, word got around in small, cautious ways. Drivers who took that route and got through rough nights without incident sometimes mentioned an old guy at a way station who had told them to reroute, to check a tire, to rest a little longer. Officially, the state insisted the facility was shuttered. No staff assigned, no inspections conducted. Company safety departments logged the way station as closed, no tickets issued there. Unofficially, when the rain came hard and the river rose and the nights grew long and thin, some drivers swore the sign still lit open, and a calm voice still crackled through the intercom, calling them by name and urging them just this once to take the long way around. Story number 5. Snow on asphalt doesn't sound like much. It's soft, quieter than rain, a gentle hiss rather than a roar. But over hours, in the dark, that soft hiss can start to sound like a whisper that never quite finishes what it's trying to say. Leo had been listening to that sound for most of the night. His rig pushed east across a wide, open plateau. The kind of country where the land could fool you into thinking it was flat, until you noticed the long, slow climb. The sky overhead was a heavy, unbroken lid of cloud, turning the world into a dim gray tunnel. It was just past midnight, but the snow made it feel later, like time itself had slowed to match the cautious speed of the few vehicles still moving. Behind him, the refrigerated trailer hummed with steady purpose. A rectangle of pale blue light glowed on its nose in his mirror, the control panel for the reefer unit, showing interior temperature, status codes, and fuel level. This run was different from his usual loads of produce and frozen food. The paperwork listed temperature-sensitive medical supplies, boxed and palletized, sealed by the shipper with a tamper-evident band stretched across the doors. The bill of lading specified a narrow temperature range, 2 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius. Deviate from it, and someone's medicine could be wasted. It wasn't the kind of load you ignored. Leo checked the reefer display in his mirror by habit every few minutes. Each time, it showed the same reassuring numbers. 4 degrees Celsius, run, fuel 3/4 full. The little blue light cut through the snowy darkness like a tiny, dependable star. The road ahead was mostly empty. A pair of taillights had disappeared into the white a while back. No one followed him. The CB was on, but most chatter had died off as the storm thickened. The world had shrunk to his headlights, his cab, his own thoughts, and the faint, constant hum from behind. He rolled his shoulders, trying to work some life back into them. Long winter nights always knotted up his muscles. At least the heater in this truck worked well. The air blowing over his boots was warm, almost too warm. He turned the fan down a notch and took a sip of coffee from the thermos wedged near the shifter. It was lukewarm now, but the bitterness helped him stay centered. The digital clock on the sip, dash read 2:41 a.m. 3 more hours, he murmured to himself. Fuel stop, then nap. The reefer beeped. Just one sharp chime, loud enough to cut through the muted noise of snow and engine. Leo glanced in the right mirror. The blue panel on the trailer nose flashed, its tiny screen cycling text. He eased off the throttle, eyes flicking between the road and the reflection. Reefer alarms could mean a compressor issue, low fuel, a sensor fault, 100 small things. Most of them annoying but not catastrophic if caught early. The snow, for the moment, had thinned. The lines on the road were visible, wet but clear. He clicked on his 4 ways, checked his mirrors again for traffic, still no one, and guided the truck toward a wide, plowed shoulder. As he rolled to a slow stop, he caught the display in the mirror long enough to make out one word. Door. He frowned. The reefer beeped again, screen now showing a code. AL03. Then cycling back to door. Great, he muttered. Door switch. The trailer doors, of course, weren't open. He would have known. The drag would have been obvious. the cold surge inside the box kicking the unit harder. But sometimes the sensors went finicky, especially in extreme temperatures. Ice could form around the contacts. A loose wire could vibrate just wrong. He put the truck in neutral, set the brake, flipped on his hazard lights, and shrugged into his coat. The cab filled with a brief rush of cold air when he opened the door. Snowflakes, small and dry, blew in like curious insects. Outside, the world felt strangely muffled. The storm had calmed, but the thick blanket on the ground swallowed sound. The only real noise was the low thrum of the idling engine and the higher, mechanical murmur of the reefer running behind the bulkhead. He walked back along the side of the trailer, boots crunching in the snow. The beam from his flashlight caught the swirling flakes, turning the air into a tunnel of glitter. His breath steamed in front of him, fading quickly. The reefer unit on the trailer nose whirred steadily. Up close, the blue display was easier to read. It showed his interior temperature, holding at 4 degrees Celsius, just as it should. Under that, the alarm code blinked. AL03. Door ajar. Leo scanned the edges of the insulated box. No visible gaps, no frost pluming from anywhere it shouldn't. The doors themselves were 30 feet behind. At the rear of the trailer, solid. Locked, sealed. Sometimes, he reminded himself, switches fail. Just because a sensor screams doesn't mean the world is actually ending. He popped open the reefer's small control panel door. The cold metal bit at his fingertips. Inside, a row of buttons and a simple menu waited. He navigated to alarm history. Only one entry glowed on the list. AL03 Dur. Duration 0 hours and 35 seconds. The reefer beeped again. The display flickered, then, just for a second, showed something else, letters that did not belong to any code he knew. LEO. He blinked. The screen glitched back to the alarm code before he could be sure he'd seen it. Maybe his eyes were tired. Maybe the light and snow had made the shape strange. He stared at the display, ignoring the prickle that rose along the back of his neck. "You didn't just spell my name," he said under his breath. "You don't get to do that." The reefer, indifferent, hummed on, its compressor cycling. He cleared the alarm, reset the unit, and waited. The temperature reading held steady. No new beeps. As he walked back to the cab, the quiet felt thicker, somehow. The truck's red hazard lights washed the snowbanks on either side in a pulsing crimson, like a heartbeat. He climbed back in, shut the door, and sat for a moment, listening to his own breathing. The hum from behind sounded exactly as it always had, mechanical, predictable. He told himself firmly that the letters he'd seen were coincidence. A partial code fragment, a transient display error. Reefer units weren't haunted. They broke, they froze, they leaked, but they did not address drivers by name. He released the brake and rolled back onto the highway. For the next hour, everything behaved. The snow lessened, became a powdery drift instead of a curtain. He passed 2 plows working in tandem, their amber lights swirling like slow beacons here in the middle of nowhere. A rest area loomed ahead at one point, but he sailed past it, determined to make his plan stop on schedule. Periodically, his right mirror caught the little blue glow of the reefer display. Each time, it held steady. 4 degrees Celsius. Run. No alarms. The sense of unease faded enough that he could almost laugh at himself. Sleep deprivation played tricks. Staring at green and blue digits for hours on end could make anyone imagine shapes that weren't there. He put on some low music, barely audible, just enough to push back the silence. The miles slid under his tires in a steady rhythm. Then, just after 2 a.m., as he crested a long, gentle grade, the reefer beeped again. This time it didn't just chime once. It issued a long, continuous tone that made him wince. The display in the mirror strobed blue and white, text cycling too fast to read from his seat. He swore softly, checked the road a clear stretch, no other headlights in sight, and eased onto the shoulder once more. The snow crunched under his tires as he slowed. His heart rate ticked up without his permission. "Not now," he muttered. "Don't do this now." He set the brake, flipped on his 4 ways, and grabbed his coat again. Outside, the air felt colder. The wind had picked up, brushing across the open land, and carrying with it a sound like distant, whispered voices, a trick of air and snow, nothing more. He made his way back along the trailer, his flashlight beam painting bright ovals in the dark. The reefer's display flashed erratically. Temperature reading 4 degrees Celsius, then 2 degrees Celsius, then 7 degrees Celsius, then back to 4 degrees Celsius. Underneath, where the alarm code should appear, words rolled past in quick succession. Door, AL03. Service, AL10. Cold. Stay. Cold. Leo stared. Okay, he said aloud, his voice sounding small in the emptiness. That's not funny. The unit beeped again, shrill and insistent. The word cold froze on the screen for a heartbeat, then shifted. LEO. This time, the letters were clear. No half-formed codes, no ambiguity. His breath shuddered once as he exhaled. He knew reefer codes. There was no ALEO or similar sequence that could explain that. He also knew that half of what a driver saw on any night run came through a filter of fatigue, but there was a limit to how far that explanation could stretch. He reached out and, without really thinking about it, rested one gloved hand on the side of the trailer. The metal was cold, vibrations from the running unit buzzing faintly through it. All right, he muttered. If you're going to have a fit, do it without taking the temp down with you. He opened the control panel door again, fingers a little clumsier now. The alarm history showed a list of codes AL03, AL10, AL02 door, temperature deviation, sensor fault. All logged in the last few minutes, duration short. He cleared them one by one, then navigated to the sensor screen. All readings matched. Interior temperature, 4 degrees Celsius. Return air. Supply air. Everything within range. Glitch, he said, as if saying it would make it true. Bad board. He reached for the small reset button tucked in the corner of the panel. Before he could press it, a muffled sound came from inside the trailer. It was not loud. Just a dull, isolated thump, like something soft but heavy shifting against the floor or wall. Not the rattle of loose cargo he'd heard that 100 times and knew its sound. This was different, singular, intentional somehow. He froze, hands suspended above the button. The hair on his arms prickled under his coat. He was parked on a slight incline. Cargo could settle, he told himself. Pallets could lean and then resettle. The sound had probably been a box or a corner, brushing the interior wall. The reefer beeped again, lower this time, almost like a question. The display shifted from codes to one short word. Cold. Leo swallowed, throat suddenly dry. That's kind of your job, he said quietly. You keep things cold. That's why you're here. His voice fell flat against the empty night. No answering sound came from inside the box. The unit hummed, the compressor cycling with a faint shudder. He reset the board. The display went dark for a 3 count, then flickered back. Steady. This time, 4 degrees Celsius. Run. No more alarms. Back in the cab, he sat for a moment before pulling out. His hands hovered on the wheel. Every instinct told him to brush it all off as malfunction and imagination. Another part of him, deeper and quieter, felt like someone had tugged gently at his sleeve in warning. He thought of the load sealed, logged, important to someone he'd never meet. He thought of the weather, the long miles still ahead, the way his eyelids felt heavy at the edges. He shifted back into gear and rolled out onto the interstate once more. The reefer behaved for the rest of the hour. No alarms, no beeps, just that steady blue glow. The storm thinned further. Stars even pushed through in patches overhead, cold and distant. The world opened up slightly. Leo adjusted his speed, gaining back a few minutes. He almost managed to convince himself that the words on the display had been stress-writing themselves on his vision, that the sound from the trailer had been simple cargo movement. At 3 a.m., though, as true fatigue began to drag at his thoughts, the reefer beeped again. This time, Leo didn't pull over right away. The alarm wasn't continuous, just a sharp double chime, like the unit clearing its throat. He flicked his eyes to the right mirror. The display showed something new. Not a code, not a word. A number 1 that was not a temperature. 3:07. He checked the clock on his dash. 3:07 a.m. The reefer display blinked, the numbers vanishing, replaced with a single line of text. Don't. Leo's fingers tightened on the wheel. Don't what? He whispered, before he could stop himself. The display cleared again, switched back to temperature. 4 degrees Celsius. Run. No alarms. He swallowed, pulse quickening. Ahead, a small blue sign materialized out of the darkness. River Plaza. Fuel. Food. Exit 212. 2 miles. That was his planned stop. He'd been aiming for it all night. Fuel. A snack. A short nap in the cab. The idea had been anchoring his sense of time. Another sign followed half a mile later. This one green and white. Rest area divided by parking only 1 mile. Just before his exit, there was a simple parking area where trucks could pull in, shut down, and sleep without the bustle of a full plaza. No fuel, no diner. Just vending machines and bathrooms. He'd stopped there before, on quieter nights, when he didn't want to deal with crowds. The reefer chimed again. In the mirror, the display shifted briefly. Don't stop. His chest tightened. It could have been coincidence. The words could have been some half-corrupted message from a maintenance screen he'd never seen before. He could have been so tired that his brain was misreading simple codes. But the timing. You're a box of compressors and fans, he muttered through his teeth. You don't decide where I stop. Then he remembered the faint irregularity he'd felt earlier in the steering. The way his eyelids dragged when he blinked now. The snow that still lingered in thin, treacherous patches. He thought about pulling into the parking area and never quite waking up again. The reefer hummed, steady and unbothered. But his mind replayed the soft thump from inside the trailer. Someone, somewhere, had once stopped in the wrong place and not made it back onto the road. He took a breath. I'll fuel at the plaza, he said aloud. Big lights, people, coffee. When the exit sign loomed, he bypassed the quiet rest area and steered instead toward the glow of a full-service stop rows of pumps, bright canopies, the familiar neon of a chain restaurant's logo. As he pulled under the fuel island lights, the reefer beeped one last time. Good. Leo's laugh came out almost like a bark. It was short, startled, not entirely sane. He filled his tanks, grabbed food, stretched his legs in the harsh, bright light. The fatigue ebbed enough that his head cleared. Sitting in the well-lit diner area, surrounded by other tired faces, he could almost convince himself that the messages on the display had been nothing but stress and suggestion. Later that morning, after he'd delivered the load to a warehouse with white floors and gloved workers, a tech from the company's maintenance department met him at the yard. Heard you had a reefer acting up, the man said, pushing up his glasses. His name patch read, KYLE. Throwing door alarms? Weird codes. Something like that, Leo said carefully. Kyle pulled up the unit's logs on a tablet, scrolling. Sensor spiked a few times, but the temp never drifted out of range, he said. You did good stopping to check. This control board's had a history of acting quirky. A history? Leo asked. Yeah. Kyle tapped a serial number. We swapped this controller off a trailer we scrapped last year. Reefer itself still worked, so they kept the guts. Figured it'd save a few bucks. Scrapped? Leo repeated. What happened to it? Kyle hesitated, glancing up briefly. Old story, he said. Long before you joined the company. Driver got stuck out in a blizzard on the north route. Parked on a little pull-off. Thought he'd wait it out. Reefer unit ran fine. Kept the cargo perfect. Driver didn't make it through the night. He said it gently, without lingering on the details. Hypothermia? Leo asked, though he already suspected the answer. Yeah, Kyle said. Out of fuel for the cab heater. They found him half out of the sleeper trying to get to the controls. Reefer was still humming along when they got there. Cargo like nothing had happened. He ran a thumb along the edge of the tablet. Some of the old hands joked the unit cared more about the freight than the driver, Kyle added. Dark humor. You know how folks get. Anyway, that truck was totaled from everything else wrong with it, but the reefer was solid. Company had us move the controller over to this trailer. Leo stared at the numbers on the screen, the little line of serial digits that tied his strange night to a man he'd never met. Does it ever do that? He asked slowly. Show words that aren't in the manual? Messages that aren't normal alarms? Kyle frowned. Not that I've seen, he said. You're the first to report anything like that. To be honest, most drivers ignore half the codes anyway. He sighed. Look, if it's creeping you out, I can tag the unit for a board swap. Takes us a shift. We put in a new controller. You get a clean slate. Leo considered it. He pictured the flashing words. Cold. Don't stop. Good. The way the unit had seemed, in some strange, impossible way, aware of him, of his choices. He remembered the sound from the trailer. The timing of the warnings. Maybe not yet, he said quietly. Let's see if it keeps acting up. If it does, we'll swap it. Kyle shrugged. Suit yourself, he said. Just don't let any alarms go too long without checking. Company doesn't like spoiled meds. I won't, Leo said. He took another load the next night, this one less sensitive frozen food, wider temp band. The weather was kinder. The sky was clearer. Still, as he headed out onto the dark highway, that small blue glow in the right mirror drew his eyes more often than before. Hours into the run, just before he reached the point where fatigue usually began to gnaw at the edges of his attention, the reefer chimed. He tensed, checked the mirror. The display, steady at -10°C this time, showed no alarm codes. Just, briefly, 4 letters. Leo. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. All right, he murmured. I see you. The letters shifted, replaced by a single word. Awake. He checked his speed, his following distance, the way his hands rested on the wheel. Yeah, he said. I'm awake. The unit hummed on. The letters vanished, replaced once more by ordinary numbers. For the rest of the night, no more words appeared. Out on the long, listening road, with snowbanks glinting under the stars and towns sleeping far beyond the reach of his headlights, Leo drove on. The reefer's soft mechanical murmur followed faithfully, its cold heart beating behind him. Somewhere, in whatever space lies between memory and machine, a driver who had once reached for those same controls in desperation seemed determined that this time, a different set of hands would make it safely to morning. Story number 6. Nate always said the open road at night didn't bother him. It was the warehouses that got under his skin. Highways were simple. Lines, signs, sky. You knew what you were dealing with. But the big distribution centers, especially on the graveyard shift, were another world entirely. Cavernous buildings lit by buzzing lights, forklifts gliding like silent insects between towering racks, echoes that went on too long. He tried not to think about that as he eased his rig off the interstate and followed the signs for Hartley Logistics, East Campus. It was 2:08 a.m., according to the dash clock. His appointment window was 2:30. He was right on time. The access road wound past a dark field and a row of low warehouses before opening onto the complex itself. Sodium vapor lamps washed everything in flat orange. Long, low buildings stretched out in parallel rows, their sides lined with dock doors like teeth in a giant metal jaw. Nate rolled down to the security gate, flicked on his interior light, and dug for his paperwork. The guard in the little booth looked as tired as he felt. She slid back the glass, took his papers, and compared information on her screen. Drop and hook? She asked, not looking up. Live unload, Nate said. Frozen freight out of Ohio. She nodded, stamped his BOL with a heavy thump, and handed it back. Shipping office is around the far side of Building B, she said, pointing. Park in the staging lane and check in. They're a little backed up tonight. Anyone ever not backed up? Nate muttered under his breath, but he smiled and said, thanks. He eased the truck through the gate, following painted arrows past rows of trailers and stacks of pallets wrapped in dull plastic. The complex felt half asleep enough activity that it wasn't dead, but not enough to feel fully alive. A hostler truck rumbled by with a trailer in tow, its cab light dimly revealing a yawning driver. He found the staging lane, slipped into an open slot, set his brake, and climbed down. The air was cold and smelled of damp concrete, diesel, and something faintly metallic from the building's vents. The shipping office was a small glass-fronted room jutting from the side of the warehouse. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. A wall clock ticked loud in the relative quiet. A handful of drivers waited on plastic chairs, heads bowed over phones or paperwork. Nate stepped up to the counter. A young man with a headset around his neck hunched over a keyboard, fingers moving fast. His name tag read, Jared. Pickup or delivery? Jared asked without looking away from his monitor. Delivery, Nate said. sliding his bowl under the glass. Frozen. Jared scanned the barcode, squinted at his screen, then at Nate. "You're early," he said. "Appointment's Shataim Shloshim," Nate replied. "Yeah." Jared rubbed one eye with the heel of his hand. "Early for tonight." They're still unloading a mess from the one window. "You might be sitting a bit." He tapped something. "Company?" Nate told him. "Cool," Jared said. "Go ahead and park in the yellow zone. I'll text your cell when we've got a door. You got numbers on the back of the trailer for the reefer?" Nate rattled them off. Jared typed, then frowned slightly. "You were loaded at Harbor Cold?" he asked. "Yeah," Nate said. "Why?" Jared shook his head. "Nothing. Their seals are always interesting to scan." "You broke the seal at all?" "Nope," Nate said. "Still intact." "Good," Jared murmured, more to himself than to Nate. He finished whatever he was doing and slid the paperwork back. "You're in the system. Go grab a coffee. We'll holler." Nate stepped aside, letting another driver move up. As he turned, a man in a faded hoodie and ball cap sitting against the far wall glanced up, eyes following him. "First time here?" the man asked quietly. "Yeah," Nate said. The man yawned, covering his mouth with one hand. "Word of advice," he said, voice low. "If they try to put you on dock 27, ask for another one." Nate paused. "What's wrong with 27? he asked. The man shrugged, looking down at his phone. "Just ask for another one," he said. "You'll see." Before Nate could press, Jared called another name. The driver stood, grabbed his papers, and shuffled off. The moment slipped away. Nate went back to his truck, moved it to the yellow-striped holding area, and killed some time scrolling through his phone. Trucks came and went around him in slow motion. A forklift beeped steadily somewhere inside the building, its sound echoing through the concrete and steel like a tired metronome. 15 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A text from a number labeled Hartley B. East. Door assignment, 27. Proceed to door. Back in. Break seal. Wait for green light. He stared at the number for a beat, then let out a breath. "Of course," he said softly. He thought about ignoring the earlier warning. Dock numbers were just numbers. Superstitions grew up around anything that saw enough use. Still, as he pulled the truck around the far end of the building, something about the way the dock doors lined the wall made him uneasy. Doors 10 through 20 bustled with activity yard trucks moving trailers, dock lights blazing, rolling doors opening and closing. Doors higher up the row were quieter. A few were dark, their overhead lights off, dock plates hanging idle. Door 27 sat near the far corner, away from the busiest stretch. Its overhead light flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow circle on the wet pavement. The dock bumper below was scuffed and worn, the rubber chipped like old teeth. Nate backed in carefully, lining his trailer square to the opening. The dock plate light stayed red as he set the brake, killed his reverse alarm, and settled. He checked his mirror. The trailer seal gleamed dull silver in the dock's shadow. He waited a minute for the usual routine, the thump of the dock plate engaging, the shift as a forklift drove in. Nothing moved. The red light over the door did not switch to green. He flicked on his hazards and sat for a moment, listening. Somewhere inside the building, machinery hummed. Distantly, a forklift beeped and a pallet jack clacked over concrete. But right here, at the back of his trailer, there was only a strange, pushed-back silence. He grabbed his jacket and hopped down. The air around Dock 27 felt cooler than on the other side of the building, an edge of chill that seeped through fabric. He walked to the rear of his trailer. The seal was intact, bands stretched tight across both doors, tag hanging. He brushed his fingers over the tag, reading the number. It matched his paperwork. He glanced up at the dock door itself. A narrow gap between the top of his trailer and the rubber seal showed only darkness within. No light leaked out from the warehouse interior. He considered going inside to ask what was taking so long. Before he could turn, something thudded against the inside wall of his trailer. It was a single, solid hit. Not violent, not enough to rock the truck, but enough to be unmistakable. A dull, hollow sound, like a heavy palm-striking sheet metal. Nate froze. Cargo shifts, he thought. Could be a pallet settling. Cold air shrinking shrink wrap. Gravity doing what it does. He waited. The silence returned. Then it happened again. 3 quick knocks this time, evenly spaced. Knock, knock, knock. This time the sound came from the rear doors themselves, right where he stood. The metal under his hand vibrated faintly with each impact. The hair along his arms rose. "Hello?" he called, his voice sounding smaller than he liked against the concrete walls and the hulking shadows of other trailers. "Anybody back there?" No answer. The air absorbed his words. He listened, heartbeat loud in his ears. For a moment, no more than a second, he thought he heard something else behind the doors. A murmur. Not quite words. Like someone speaking through several layers of insulation. Then nothing. He backed up a step, eyes fixed on the seal. Protocol said break the seal when assigned, open the doors, let the warehouse staff do the rest. If someone really was inside, it would be better to find out now. People sometimes did desperate things to hitch a ride unnoticed. He reached for the metal band. As his fingers closed around it, the knocking started again, faster. This time it wasn't 3 measured raps, but a flurry of soft impacts, bumping and sliding, like someone pressing both hands against the inside and patting in a blind, urgent rhythm. He snatched his hand back. The band hung there, still. The trailer doors remained shut. The words the driver in the hoodie had spoken in the office came back to him. "If they try to put you on dock 27, ask for another one." He swallowed. "This is stupid," he muttered. "You're letting a bit of noise spook you." He made himself reach out again, fingers curling around the seal. As he did, something else cut through the faint hum of the building. A whisper. Very soft. Very close. "Don't." The word was so quiet he might have imagined it. Still, it had shape. It came from the other side of the thin metal. His heart pounded once, hard enough to make his chest ache. He stepped back, hand dropping away from the seal. "Nope," he said under his breath. "We're not doing that." He walked briskly along the side of his trailer and around the nose, back into the spill of light from the main yard. The difference in temperature and brightness between that corner dock and the rest of the operation felt like crossing a border. Inside the shipping office, Jared looked up, surprised to see him again so soon. "Truck on 27, Nate said, keeping his voice low and even. "You guys ready for me?" Jared glanced at his screen. "Says you're docked," he said. "We haven't opened you up yet. Why, problem?" "Maybe," Nate said. He hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "I'm hearing knocking on the inside of my trailer from the dock." Jared's expression shifted just a hair. "Knocking," he repeated. "Yeah," Nate said. "And I thought I heard someone. I know how that sounds. But if you've got somebody back there, I'd rather not just crack it open by myself." The room, which had been filled with the quiet rustle of paperwork and the low buzz of a TV in the corner, seemed to fall even more still. At a side desk, an older woman in a reflective vest looked up from her clipboard. Her badge read, "Martinez." "What door?" she asked. 27, Nate said. Martinez and Jared exchanged a look that made his skin prickle. "I thought 27 was locked out overnight," Martinez said. "System shows it open," Jared replied, tapping keys. "Look." He angled the monitor. Nate saw a simple layout of rectangles representing docks. Number 20. 7 glowed green. Martinez pursed her lips. "Pull the camera," she said. Jared clicked something. A grainy black and white feed appeared in a small window. An overhead view of a dock bay. A trailer backed in. The faint outline of the dock plate. Dust motes drifted in the light of the camera's infrared. No movement. No forklift. No people. "Nothing," Jared said. "No one in the well. Doors look shut." "That camera's been glitchy since the freeze," Martinez said. "Check the audio." "There is no audio," Jared reminded her. "Budget cuts, remember?" She stood, wiping her hands on her safety vest. "I'll go down there," she said. "You coming?" Nate surprised himself by nodding. Together they walked along the interior corridor that ran behind the dock doors. It was cooler here, cold, from massive, chilled rooms beyond. Yellow strip lights buzzed overhead, turning the concrete floor a dull, sickly hue. Numbers stenciled above each roll-up door marked the bays. The ones near the center bustled forklifts zipping in and out, drivers chatting with warehouse workers, pallet jacks squeaking. As they moved toward the far end, the noise thinned. Door 27 stood alone in a pool of weaker light. The roll-up panel was down, the metal skin dull. A control box with up and down buttons was mounted to the wall beside it. A small window set high in the door showed only the top corner of Nate's trailer. They stopped. The corridor here felt colder, the air stiller. "You hear anything now?" Martinez asked. Nate listened. At first, nothing. Then, so faint he almost doubted it, 3 slow knocks. They came not from the door in front of him, but from the other side of it, from inside the gap between trailer and dock. Martinez heard it too. Her eyes narrowed. "Again," she murmured. A second later they came, knock, 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 evenly spaced, deliberate. Martinez's jaw tightened. "Jared," she said into her radio. "Get security down to 27. Possible unauthorized in trailer. And call a supervisor." "Copy," Jared's voice crackled back. He sounded unsettled. They waited. The knocking did not repeat. The corridor hummed with distant refrigeration, even when no one moved. After a minute, a uniformed security guard jogged up, breathing faintly harder than usual. An older man in a manager's badge followed at a walk. His name was Reeves. "What's going on?" Reeves asked. "Driver reports knocking inside his trailer," Martinez said, professional. "Door 27. We both heard it." Reeves shot a look at the door number that was not quite neutral. "Seal intact?" he asked Nate. "Yeah," Nate said. "Company seal from pickup. I didn't break it." Reeves exhaled slowly. "We had a situation years back," he said quietly, looking more at Martinez than at Nate. "Stowaways in a load. Not at this dock, but same building. After that, corporate came down hard. We don't ignore this stuff." He nodded toward the panel. "Ho, open her up from inside. We'll cut the seal and inspect." He looked at Nate. "You're good with that?" he asked. "If there's someone back there, I'd rather you find them," Nate said. Reeves nodded to the guard. The guard stepped forward, scanned the trailer seal number with a handheld device, then cut it with a set of bolt cutters. The metal band snapped with a dull twang. He rolled up the dock door a foot, peered into the dim space between dock and trailer, then raised it the rest of the way. Cold air rushed out, carrying with it the faint smell of frozen food and plastic wrap. They all listened. Silence. The guard took a flashlight, clicked it on, and stepped carefully onto the dock plate. His beam swept the inside of Nate's trailer, the neat rows of pallets, shrink-wrapped and stacked, frost glinting faintly on the edges. Nothing moved. "No one visible," he called back. "No disturbance at the back. Load looks solid." Martinez and Reeves exchanged another look. "Could be settling," Reeves said, but he didn't sound convinced. Nate stepped up just enough to see inside. The box looked exactly as it had when he'd shut the doors at the shipper. Tidy. Ordinary. He listened again. Nothing now. No knocks. No whispers. "What about that camera feed?" Martinez asked Reeves quietly. "We still having static on this door?" Reeves' jaw set. "Door 27's had issues since before your time," he said. "We're supposed to use it only when the others are slammed, and only up to a certain hour." He looked at Nate. "We'll move you. Back out, take door 12. We'll complete the unload there." "What's wrong with this door?" Nate asked. Reeves's eyes slid to the metal panel, then back. "Tonight?" he said. "Tonight it's out of service." Nate didn't push. He backed out carefully, feeling the odd relief of putting a few more feet between his trailer and that particular stretch of concrete. The lights over door 12 burned brighter. The dock plate there clanged solidly when it engaged. Forklifts came and went, their beeps and engine whines comfortingly normal. The unload lasted an hour. Pallets rolled out, signatures were scribbled, paperwork was stamped. No further knocks came from the trailer. The chill that had followed Nate around earlier seemed to lift with each pallet that left the box. When it was done, he pulled away and parked in a corner of the yard to finish his logs and rest his eyes before hitting the highway again. As he sat there, sipping lukewarm coffee, someone tapped on his driver's door. Nate jumped, then relaxed when he saw it was Martinez, her reflective vest bright in his side mirror. He opened the door a crack. "Yeah." She tilted her head toward the passenger side. "Mind if I come up a sec?" she asked, off the record. He hesitated, then nodded. She climbed the steps, shut the door behind her, and perched on the edge of the passenger seat, hands folded. "You're not the first to say you heard something at 27, she said without preamble. Nate watched her carefully. "I figured," he said. "Kinda got that feeling." She glanced out at the long wall of the building, the row of dark rectangles where dock doors Saturday. "We lost a guy there," she said quietly. 4 winters ago. New forklift driver. Night shift. There was a rack collapse in the frozen section linked to 27. Nobody saw it happen. Camera on that aisle froze on one frame. When they finally noticed he was missing, they traced his equipment. Found him under a mess of pallets and boxes, pinned. The cold didn't do him any favors. She kept the details spare, respectful. "He was down for a while," she added. "Longer than it should have taken us to reach him. Radios were glitching. Motion sensors didn't trip. Whole section went quiet." Nate thought of the silence in the corridor, the stillness around that door. "Since then, we've had equipment act strange on that dock," Martinez went on. "Lights flicker. That camera you saw cuts out. People report hearing things in trailers if they're parked there after about midnight. Knocking. Sometimes a voice." "Does anyone listen?" Nate asked. "Depends who you ask," she said. "Official line is that buildings settle, metal pops, cold storage plays tricks. Unofficially," she shrugged, "most of us who've been here a while try not to put anyone on 27 at night. You slip through the cracks." Nate was quiet for a moment. "What was his name?" he asked. "The forklift driver?" Martinez looked down at her hands. "Elias. He used to stay late, help the newer guys. Always the one checking if a trailer was actually empty before someone signed it. He hated the idea of anyone being left where they couldn't get out. The knocking he'd heard echoed in his memory. Maybe he's still checking," Nate said softly. Martinez's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Maybe," she said. She reached for the door handle. "Either way, if you come back through here on nights, and they say 27, you come find me. We'll find you something else." He nodded. "Deal," he said. She climbed back down, footsteps crunching on the gravel. He watched her walk toward the building, small against the expanse of concrete and steel. A few minutes later, as he pulled out of the yard, he glanced in his mirror one last time. The building's long sides slid past, dock doors ticking by like frames in a film. 12, 13, 14. The brighter cluster near the center. Then the quieter stretch. When he drew even with 27, its overhead light, which had been dark, flickered on for a moment. Not fully. Just a weak, brief glow, as if something behind the lens had breathed. In that dim halo, he could just make out the faded outline of the number 27 above the door. As his trailer cleared the corner, the light flickered once more, on, off, as if in a slow, deliberate pattern. Knock, knock, knock. Then it went dark again, out on the freeway miles later. With the warehouse far behind and the sky just beginning to think about dawn, Nate found himself checking his trailer doors twice at each stop. He listened a little longer before he pulled away, and when other drivers at the next yard grumbled about eerie docks and long nights, he found himself saying, almost casually, "If they try to give you door 27 at Hartley East, ask for another one." He left the reasons vague. Some things were easier to understand when you felt them yourself. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse, in the quiet hours when most of the world slept, forklifts still rolled and pallets still shifted. And at one particular dock, where concrete met steel and cold air leaked in around the edges, a faint, patient knocking could sometimes be heard from the other side of closed doors, as if someone who once waited too long to be found was now determined that no sealed trailer on that stretch of wall would be ignored again. Story number 7. Some rest areas felt like little islands of safety dropped along the highway. Others felt like places the night tried very hard to forget. Jenna had slept at all kinds. She'd parked under buzzing lights beside busy interstates, tucked into narrow gravel turnouts on mountain roads, and spent more than a few dawns wedged between reefers, humming like oversized refrigerators. She knew how to park with her doors facing the cameras, how to wedge her cooler just so to block a draft, which sounds meant normal activity, and which meant she needed to sit up and listen. She didn't scare easily, but she'd learned to listen. That evening, As she fueled at a truck stop just off the main highway, she overheard two older drivers talking by the coffee machines. Their voices drifted through the steam and clatter. "I'm telling you, I won't sleep there anymore," one said. "Not after last winter." "Rest Area 5? The other asked. "The one at mile 310? "Yeah, that one. I don't care if it's right where I hit my 11. I'll grab the exit before or push to the next town. I'll take a Walmart lot over that place." Jenna poured her coffee, pretending not to listen. The name Rest Area 5 lodged in her mind. It was on her route tonight. "What happened?" the second driver asked. The first shrugged, shifting his weight. "Depends who you ask," he said. "Some say there was a series of break-ins a few years back. Trucks, cars, RVs, doors tested in the middle of the night. One guy didn't make it. After that, they put up more lights and cameras. Others say there's something else out there now. Something that walks the lot and checks every door. Like it's making sure nobody left themselves wide open." "That's just old stories," the second driver said, but his tone held a sliver of doubt. The first took a sip of his coffee. "Maybe," he said. "Just do me a favor. If you do stop there, lock up tight. And if you hear your door handles rattle, don't go looking out the window." Jenna tried to tell herself it was just road talk, the kind of tale that grew legs in driver lounges. Still, when she stepped out into the cooling evening air, the sky deepening toward purple, she checked her route again. Mile 310 was right where she'd planned to stop. She considered pushing on, going another hour to the next town. But her log and her body both argued. She'd been up since early, driven hard through a long afternoon of construction delays. Her shoulders ached. A faint, dull pressure had begun behind her eyes, the kind that told her she'd gone far enough for one day. "Rest Area 5 it is," she murmured, more to test how the words felt leaving her mouth than anything else. The sun slipped fully below the horizon as she rolled back onto the interstate. The sky went from purple to deep blue to black. The highway thinned of traffic, taillights disappearing ahead one by one until she felt almost alone. Kilometers, then miles, ticked past. Her headlights painted the white lines and the reflective eyes of roadside posts. The radio muttered quietly, a mix of distant stations fading in and out. Somewhere far away, a lightning storm flashed behind a bank of clouds, too distant for thunder. After an hour, the green sign appeared on the right shoulder. "Rest Area 5, 2 miles. Trucks divided by cars, divided by picnic." Jenna flexed her fingers around the wheel. "Lights, cameras, locked doors," she said softly to herself. "Sleep. Then go." She took the exit. The ramp curved gently away from the freeway, climbing a little hill lined with trees. At the top, the rest area opened like a small clearing rows of parking spaces, a low concrete building with restrooms and vending machines, a ring of tall lamps spilling pale circles on the pavement. It looked ordinary. Nothing like the stories that had drifted through the truck stop coffee steam. The truck lot sat to the right, separated from the smaller car section by a run of grass and a chain-link fence. 3 other rigs were parked there. One older day cab with a flatbed, one company truck with a white box trailer, and a newer owner-operator rig with polished chrome that still shone even in the dim light. Jenna chose a spot under one of the taller lamps, where the light fell cleanly across her cab. Habit. She set the brake, let the engine idle for a minute, then shut it down. The sudden quiet pressed close, layered only with the faint sounds of fans from the restroom building and the occasional whoosh of a car on the highway below. She did a quick sweep of her usual routine. Driver's door, locked. Passenger door, locked. Both latch catches flipped down. Windows up, vents cracked only at the top. Curtains ready to pull. Pepper spray within reach by her bunk. Phone on charger. Shoes set where she could slip them on fast. She hesitated once, hand hovering over the lock buttons again, then forced a small, humorless smile. "Spooked by a coffee counter story," she said. "That's a new one." Still, she double-checked the doors. She climbed down to use the restroom, hoodie pulled tight against the chill. The air smelled of damp grass and asphalt that had cooled from the day's heat. Crickets chirped faintly in the bushes, their song competing with the buzz of the tall lights. Inside the building, the echo of her footsteps followed her down the tiled corridor. A vending machine hummed softly, its bright display offering chips and sodas that somehow seemed too brightly colored for the hour. A woman washed her hands at the sink, then offered Jenna a polite, tired nod. Outside by the cars, a man stretched beside a minivan, shaking off his own road weariness. It was all so normal that she wondered again why her stomach felt faintly knotted. She returned to her truck, climbed in, and shut the door with a solid thunk. The cab wrapped around her like a familiar shell. The outside world felt at a slight remove now, like weather behind a window. She pulled the thick front curtains across the windshield, securing them with their Velcro strip. The side curtains followed, enclosing her in a small, fabric-walled cocoon. The dim glow from the sleeper light softened the edges of everything: dashboard, seats, the neat pile of clothes on the bunk. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m., just before dawn, giving herself a few hours of sleep, enough to reset her senses without stretching her hours. As she lay down, the faint hum from the building vents and the distant whisper of highway noise threaded into a steady background murmur. Her breathing slowed. Sleep came quickly, the kind that starts like a stone dropped into deep water. At some point in the night, she surfaced. Not fully awake, not fully asleep. Somewhere in between, caught in that strange, heavy place where sounds feel too loud and time feels too slow. Her eyes opened to darkness, broken only by the faintest hint of light seeping around the edges of her curtains. She could see the vague shape of the cab around her, the outline of the driver's seat, the faint glint of a chrome handle. She tried to shift, to roll onto her side. Her body did not move. A familiar weight held her down, sleep paralysis. It wasn't new to her. She'd had it a handful of times over the years, always after long, exhausted stretches. Usually it passed in seconds. Her mind would wake before her muscles, pinning her in place for a short, uncomfortable wait. She told herself, that's all this was now. Just a mistimed wake-up. Then she heard the footsteps. Very soft, on the pavement outside. Slow, deliberate. Not the brisk stride of someone walking to the restroom and back. Not the clatter of a driver climbing into a cab. A measured set of steps that moved along the line of parked trucks, pacing from one to the next. Step, step, pausa, step. The sound grew a little louder as whoever it was came closer to her door. Her heartbeat climbed, thudding in her ears, competing with the faint hiss of night air through her vents. It's just someone walking their dog, she thought, or checking their load. No jangling of a leash, no low talk to a pet, just boots on asphalt. The steps stopped right beside her driver's door. She heard the faint metallic rattle of her handle being tested, just a light press, enough to shift it against the lock. The handle didn't move far. She'd flipped the manual catch down before bedding down. She felt, rather than heard, the small resistance of the mechanism doing its job. The person outside didn't yank, didn't pound. The handle remained still after that one small test. Jenna's breath came faster. She tried to will her limbs to move, to sit up, to look. Her muscles stayed heavy, pinned benevolently by whatever quirk of her sleep cycle had left her conscious but motionless. She listened. The footsteps resumed, moving along the far side of her cab now, just outside the passenger door. Again, a pause. Again, the faint test of the handle. Click. Small, contained. Like someone tapping a loose coin against metal. Her mind flashed an image she didn't want. A figure in the dark working their way along the row of trucks, trying each door, seeing which ones would yield. The stories at the coffee counter nudged at the edges of her thoughts. She wanted to call out, to say, I'm awake, go away. Her throat tightened, her tongue felt leaden. The handle at the passenger door jiggled again, just once more. A longer pause followed, weighty and expectant. And then, very close to her ear, from the direction of that door, came a voice, barely more than a breath, so soft she might have mistaken it for wind through the vent. Lock it whispered. Her heart slammed once, hard. The sound did not carry the rough edge she associated with danger. There was no anger in it, no urgency that pushed toward panic. It sounded tired, worn, a warning.